Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Hot Off the Press. I am Samanvita, and I'll be your MC for today. Thank you for attending this panel conference, and we are so excited to hear from our distinguished panelists. But before that, let me invite our guest of honor, Professor Jack Chew, the chair of the WKW School of Communication and Information, to deliver his opening remarks. Professor Chew, please.
Thank you, and good afternoon. It was very heartwarming to receive the email invitation from our undergraduate students.
I cannot hear.
That I learned this is the first time for our undergrad students in public relations, strategic communication at large, to host such a important event. So it's a congratulations to a new start of our undergraduate pedagogical practices. And the topic of trust in public relations cannot be more important, because today public relations, like many other of our media and communication and information industries, are being disrupted. Maybe disruption is not even the right word. Some of our colleagues are even using the word like dismantling, all right, with the effect of generative AI, for example, that has been changing the processes of public relations, and also not just the technological, but political, economic. If you are following the latest tariff war, right? And so the world's economy, of which Singapore is always a very integral part, as we thrive on our trade, on our global international connections. But now the whole world is volatile. So in Singapore, in the public relations industry, for example, we need to be even better prepared for volatility, for ways to building brands, resilience, with transparency, and also confidence from consumers and citizens around the world, and also with business in Singapore. So this is a very important moment that we learn from our industry partners. I'm very grateful. We have our speakers from the very experienced speakers from the industry who will be discussing in this inaugural conference, if I can call it, issues of workplace communication, of data management, and also mismanagement, right, as well as UGC and the implications, for our learning, and even more importantly, practice, right, beyond the classroom, in the real world, in cyberspace, in Singapore, and to the world. So with this, I'd like to thank again to our very talented undergraduate students, and welcome all participants, from MMC included. And so welcome everyone, and thank you, and I look forward to a really fruitful discussion.
Thank you, Professor Chew. Now, let us put our hands together for our senior lecturer in the WKW School, Ms. Wong Pei Wen, to address and officially welcome us to this panel conference. Ms. Wong, please.
Okay, all right. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really my pleasure to welcome all of you here, and thank you to our chair, Professor Jack Chew, for being our guest of honor and for giving us the welcome address. And we're very encouraged by your words, and we'll continue, to put forth many insightful conferences from here onwards. I want to start by recognizing the students from my Issues in PR class who organized this event. The conference part is part of their immersive learning experience, and I wanted them to dive deeper into PR topics that they are passionate about. So it started with them, researching across the industry, what are some of the important topics in PR, right, and submitting their proposals and justifying why this is an important issue. And from there, we looked at, the speakers who can contribute insights beyond the classroom. So it's a lot more immersive than for me to just invite guest speakers into the classroom. And they've done an excellent job, and I look forward to seeing them moderate today's discussions. And a very heartfelt thanks, of course, to our 3 panels and panelists. When they learned that this event is organized not for practitioners, but for students and by students, they did not balk at the idea. Instead, they were very enthusiastic, and their enthusiasm and willingness to share their insights with young minds here, purely for the sake of learning, is truly admirable. That they're taking time out today, to do that. And the next thing I want to talk about is why are we here. So a career in public relations is quite exciting, so exciting that my daughter has decided to join the fray. But it's also more complex than ever before, because PR practitioners today, they're not only expected to juggle multiple issues, sometimes all at once, but frequently navigate crisis, which can have far-reaching consequences. Now, it's not just about managing a brand or crafting a message. It makes my job in the past look a lot easier, but it's about addressing real-world challenges in an ethical, thoughtful, and purposeful manner. Now, here's where it gets a little trickier. Before we can lead a team, right, or represent an organization, we need to take a step back and reflect upon ourselves. Where do we stand when it comes to our values, our beliefs, and our purpose? And that was one of my first lessons for this class. It's about the moral compass when it comes to making these tricky decisions. What kind of professional do you want to be? So these are the questions that every PR practitioner must ask ourselves today, because it's the moral compass that will guide you through these tough moments that you will experience in your careers. Now, that's why it's important to know where you stand before you step into these situations. So I hope today's session will give us the opportunity to explore these challenges with the help of our experienced panelists, where we'll hear about best practices, lessons learned, and some of the realities of working in PR that aren't always covered in the textbooks. And I hope this setting, where it's a university environment, feels like a safe space where we can have an open, honest conversation about these topics and to think critically about what it means to pursue a career in PR today. So as we begin, I encourage all of you, whether you're an undergraduate, just starting out, or a graduate student, which we have many here, and including our alumni as well, preparing for your next steps, to listen carefully, ask questions on Slido, and reflect on whether what you learned today connects with your own goals and values. So thank you again to our student organizers for making this event happen, and to our panelists for sharing their time and expertise with us. I look forward to what promises to be an insightful day ahead. Thank you.
Before we start today, if you have any questions, there is a Slido QR code that will be made available on the introductory slide of each panel. And with that, let me introduce to you our first panel of the day. This panel explores how PR professionals can effectively communicate fairly and inclusively within organizations. It will address challenges in promoting workplace fairness, the importance of inclusive messaging, and how PR can bridge cultural and generational gaps to build trust and enhance company reputation. Firstly, we have Mr. Tam Chen Ping, also known as CP. CP Tam is a seasoned HR and LLOD leader and consultant based in Singapore with over 15 years in experience across diverse industries and markets in Asia. He brings deep expertise in designing and delivering strategic HR interventions, supporting transformation efforts, and building future-ready capabilities for organizations. Currently, he is a fractional CHRO with a venture capitalist firm guiding their portfolio of fintech startups while representing SHRM, the largest professional HR body in the world. He is also a part-time lecturer in NTU with NBS as well as with SUSS and Murdoch University. Next, we have Mr. Brian Lim. Brian is a dynamic HR leader with a strong background in talent and leadership development, culture building, and organizational change. As the head of Group Talent and Development at United Overseas Bank, also known as UOB, Brian oversees talent management, leadership succession and development, performance management, employee learning, and organization development initiatives. Before UOB, Brian held some senior leadership roles in business HR, learning and development, and rewards management at multinational organizations such as the British American Tobacco, British Telecom, Kraft Foods, and Neptune Orient Lines. He is an active community service volunteer, a frequent speaker at regional conferences, and a regular contributor to HR publications. Our last speaker for this panel is Ms. Dian Jie Chun. Jie Chun is the consulting lead for Edelman's workplace advisory offering in Asia Pacific. She has 20 years of experience across the people side of organizations, financial services, and public policy in Singapore and Asia Pacific as an in-house and external consultant. Her experiences includes communications, facilitating team sessions, and coaching leaders to create psychological safety and inclusive workplaces for high employee engagement and innovation. Jia Jun has spent the past 9 years advising Aware's leadership on organizational development and employee engagement and is currently completing her INSEAD Masters in Change, focusing on virtual team effectiveness and conflict management. May I now invite our 3 speakers and our moderator for this panel, Sarah, up on stage, please.
Thank you, Salman, for the kind introduction, and a very big thank you to our speakers, CP, Brian, and Jia Jun, for joining us today. So I'm Sarah, and I'll be moderating the panel. So we are really excited to have a dialogue with our esteemed panelists and dive into the topic of workplace inclusivity, which is an increasingly important issue for PR professionals. So my team, comprising of communication, business, and social science students, hopes to integrate different perspectives of workplace inclusivity and draw on the expertise of our panelists. So for those in the audience, if you have any question, you can use our Slido, which will be flashed over at this QR code, and we will have a 10-minute Q&A at the end of this panel. And before we jump in, let me share some context on how this panel came to be. So Singapore's recent Workplace Fairness Bill shows that organizations must proactively build equitable and supportive work environments. In 2023 survey, 78% of employees in Singapore said that they prioritize workplace fairness, but only 1 out of 4 feel that their workplace is genuinely inclusive. So what do inclusive and fairness really mean to both employees and employers? And how can organizations close that gap? So let's turn to our panel today, where we will explore how to build a culture of listening and mutual understanding, the best practices for meaningful workplace fairness and inclusivity, how PR professionals can build an engaging employee culture, and finally, how workplace fairness narratives can enhance employer branding. So with that, to begin, let's start with a broad question before moving into the more specific ones. So in 1 or 2 sentences, could you share your thoughts on the current state of workplace inclusivity? Then maybe we can start off first.
Just going back to what you mentioned earlier, right? You mentioned that 1 out of 4 individuals working in or employees feel that more can be done, right, in the area of inclusivity, right, in the workplace.
Correct.
And given the context that today we are, among experts and aspiring experts in communication, one of the reasons I feel that the number is so low, right, is really about communication. Right, a lot of times, as a HR leader myself, when I talk to employees and ask them about the initiative in the company, right, it's not uncommon to hear employees giving you a blank look and say, well, I don't know that we have such things going on in the company. So it's very much got to do with communication. So my 1 sentence is that it's not that we are not already doing a lot, right, in the area of inclusivity. I mean, of course, we can always do more, right? But anything that you want to do more comes with a price. It's always opportunity cost, right? But my 1 sentence is the notion that a lot more can be done in the way we communicate across, right, and engaging the employees, right, on what we are, and what we, right, I'm talking about here, don't just relate to management, but also individuals like, some of us or those of us in HR, right, how are we communicating across this initiative? So it's very much about doing better in the way we communicate, right, to across the employees.
Thank you. I think communication is really important. And I think I'd like to hear Brian also to chip in more about this question.
I think if I try to answer the question, it's quite a complex one. I think first and foremost, maybe a word of caution, right, that we tend to label ourselves. So people in the room, you may label yourself as mass communication experts or PR experts, and then a few of us may label ourselves as HR professionals and so on. I think that is probably the crux of the problem today. I think there is a myriad of issues that organizations face, right? I think diversity and inclusion is one of those topics. There is a lot of talk about organizational culture that promotes more responsible, more ethical behavior of just from organizations, right? That they are not mere money-making machines. So beyond that, I think, and I would describe the current state, is that the parts are not very well integrated. And CB is right that the communication isn't helping. There isn't enough of a clarity. I think for me, where we stand in Singapore and being part of Asia, I think we come from a long history and we have a lot of baggage. In a positive way, you say you have a lot of legacy, a lot of experience. But in that same way, we keep a lot of the tribalism and a lot of the historical pains and stereotypes. And as we try to progress, it's easy for even academics to label Asia as one. There's no such thing, right? I guess it's a collection of very dispersed, diverse, very heterogeneous groups of people who come from very, very different heritage. So I think we need to recognize that first and foremost, that is likely the scenario. And it's, as I'm thinking of it, I think Singapore is clearly ahead of the pack in terms of many of these topics. Maybe Hong Kong is another example where they are perhaps a little bit more sophisticated. But nevertheless, I think in my mind, it's a journey and that we are all generally heading towards a common direction and destination. But because of what we have and what we carry on our backs, metaphorically, we're moving at quite different pace. And some of us may be meandering into valleys and caves and if I may use that analogy. So if we recognize that it is an uneven and perhaps, if I use a strong term, a disintegrated approach in general, then you kind of know what to do, right? And I think that's how I would see the current state of inclusivity or diversity, or the amount of unconscious bias that exists. All this needs to be addressed, as a process, and eventually we'll get to a better place. Maybe we will never get rid of the issues we have completely, and maybe that's something that we have to feel comfortable about, right? I think Prof. Chu talked about disruption. I think we have to get very comfortable with that. In fact, we shouldn't call it disruption. We should just accept it as the environment is evolving, it's changing, it will continue to be so. And if I quote a wise man who once said, change is constant, and then my CEO came around and said, actually, that's not true. Change is accelerating. Yeah, maybe I will stop here.
Thank you, Brian, for your thoughtful insights. I think it's really true that change is really the only constant in life, and that even though workplace inclusivity might be a small word, it's really all about the process itself. And there's really a lot of things to think about when it comes to this workplace inclusivity. So maybe, JJ, you can share your thoughts on this also.
Sure, thank you. Well, first of all, I see 1 or 2 familiar faces, so thanks for coming to this event again. Second, we really want to be very inclusive, so we put up the QR code. We had a chat before the panel that we will love for your questions. So please put it. Sarah, we can have more time for Q&A, so it's more interactive. I think what I really appreciate is Pei Wen's comment that, as thoughtful, purposeful PR professionals, you really need to navigate complexity. So when we think about the term of inclusive workplace, it's good not to look at simplistic statements about what inclusive means, and like what Brian said, there's so many layers of complexity, right? So I think many of you have studied like the movement behind D&I in America. It's a very different context in Asia. And then what is Asia Pacific? What is Asia? It's a construct. So what inclusive workplace and priorities are in India is very different from Japan, Korea, and Singapore. So when I thought about your question about the current state, 3 words came to mind. So I think one, progress is very important. I think every time I interact with people at Aware who are really passionate about gender equality, and inclusiveness of course goes beyond gender, so I want to make it clear because that's oversimplistic. But what I wanted to say is that they remind me that sometimes it's important to zoom out. So if you look through the lens of decades of progress and inclusiveness at workplaces, the kind of dialogues you're having around, including people who are disabled, of different nationalities, different languages, even mental health issues, people who have lived a longer time actually would tell you that it was impossible to have those kind of conversations. So when this is just 13 years ago when I was in-house at the Monetary Authority of Singapore as Employee Engagement Lead, I was an organization development practitioner, and I wanted to talk about the emotions of change and transformation. I was told by my OD department head that we don't talk about emotions here. Okay, but if you look at MAS's social media posts, or you interact with people there, they're very comfortable about it. They are now regularly talking about mental health issues, and so the progress we've seen with the Work Fairness Bill on various fronts is really good in terms of progress. And then I wanted to point out again that point about diversity. So we've made that point about every Asia country, corporation, individual is very different, it's very diverse. And then the last point is that it's really, really hard. So absolutely believe that communication is critical to setting expectations and understandings, that rewiring mental assumptions of what inclusive means as we progress with societal norms. And also the experience of inclusion for individual is very, very different. So it goes beyond communication. It is, what is the impact when I interact with you and I don't truly understand what your world is like? Am I interacting in a way that is a positive impact on you, whatever my intention is? So that's something that we're all learning and growing each time. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that was a really great answer to the first question. It's a warm up, and now I'm even more excited to learn more from them. So it's interesting to hear how each of you view the current state of inclusivity very differently. And now I think we can dive into some of the more specific questions and strategies that organizations can adopt to move towards inclusivity itself. So let's now turn to Jie Jun and Brian for this question. What do you think are some of the best practices for meaningful workplace fairness and inclusivity that you have seen so far?
I think the caveat is that I think it's an evolving space. The act that we refer to, if I'm not wrong, had only been passed in January this year. So it's been years of accumulated consideration around some of the unfair practices that have existed. And I think we have progressively over the years, even before the act was passed, started correcting some of these stereotypical practices and biases, right? So I would say, we put the act aside, right? We put the legislation aside and say, what I have seen perhaps in terms of good practices, especially in organizations where they are clear, right? I think the expectations are clear. So whether you look at it as there is a clear vision about what inclusivity or the removal of discrimination means to the organization. So many of these organizations, I would include my organization in that space, that we have a clearly stated set of expectations. We call it a code of conduct that is expected. Of course, like my earlier point, it encompasses beyond simply, removal of discrimination, but it goes on to expect a much higher order expectations of our people, right? That they have to act honorably and so on and so forth, right? And I think the topic of trust comes across for this whole conference. So indeed, it is about, the outcome is trust, right? If you can remove those discriminatory practices, I think it contributes towards building trust within the workforce. So I think for me, best practice is clarity of the expectation in whatever form, right? It could come in a form of a clear narrative, it could come in a form of a code of conduct like my organization ascribes to. And then if you go along that path, you have set an expectation or goal, and now it's about, how do you promote that goal? And very close to my role in the organization is really driving the change and driving the skilling or the competency building process. So training comes to mind, a lot of deliberate communication campaigns come to mind, and that relates to the area that, the field that you are currently studying. Right? How do you combine a training approach as well as a change management approach, which then makes use of multiple interventions to try and close the gap, right? So you've got a goal, and you try and close that gap. Then the third element that I think is really important is to allow for the feedback, or in some cases you can call it measurement or evaluation, right? How do you know that you've got a goal, you've tried to close the gap or address the issues that your organization is facing? How well are you doing, or how badly are you doing? So I think in that form, as simple as today, there's, the organizing team has put Slido as a channel for you to provide feedback. I would say, I echo what Jie Jun has said, which is we welcome interaction. Don't use Slido. Open your mouth, put out your hand, right? Be brave and talk about it. And that's related to this topic that we're discussing, right? Is that provide multiple channels, right? There are people that may not feel the psychological safety to be identified for their feedback. Then, in organizations, there are employee surveys. In some cases, it's called an engagement survey and so on and so forth. But it's a official feedback channel where questions are asked, both closed and open-ended. And in this day and age, actually, with AI, LLMs being more real, actually you can ask a lot more open-ended questions, which will potentially give you much better qualitative feedback than the old model of, basically going close-ended, right? So I think that evaluation, that measurement is going to be key. And as you get the feedback from the organization, from the people, you then course correct, right? You then improve. And to me, I think, for me at least, I think those three elements would fit, if there's such a thing as best practice, I would say in my mind would work.
So I think I'll build on what Brian said. So in my daily work, I work with quite a lot of global multinational companies operating Asia Pacific. And a very big thing that's happening is a lot of them are undergoing transformation, whether it's workforce restructuring, changing their business operating model, which has a lot of knock-on effects on the employees, which might include retrenchment, which might include learning new skills, new types, fitting them into new jobs. So these are very big changes happening, and when I think about, I think the organizing team was saying that they'll love to hear about, real life cases I'm working on. I was really touched by a project. It was about a 1-year project partnering with a global MNC that was restructuring in the region. And the internal communications professional was partnering very closely with the transformation office, the corporate planning team, the human resource team, as well as the change management team. So like Brian said, what they were doing really well was the organization as a whole had shared strategic goals around transformation, and they had shared structures and processes in order for the different departments to add value to the entire process. So it's not really that, I'm PR, I'm comms, I only do this, but everyone pitches in with the shared goal to create a great transformation employee experience so that people continue to feel included in the restructuring process. Like, I know what's happening, I'm very anxious, they're giving me enough information. They want me to apply for new jobs because my job is not available anymore, and they've communicated very clearly through videos and emails and cascading through my manager what the process of applying the job is for, because it's a meritocratic process and it requires certain criteria to be met. I also have anxiety around potentially having to move locations to be on site with my team or work remotely. So they did a really good job writing empathetic, anticipated FAQs, and really looked to us to be that sounding board to say, we're very deep in the trenches. So as an agency, Edelman, can you look at, what we're drafting, the content we're pushing out? Is it really going to land well? So we did change management stakeholder mapping, and we made sure that the people most affected, we put the most care into communication and the experience of change, and we made sure that there was resourcing. So typically these things are multi-year journeys, and I think, like Pei Wen said, it's like experiencing navigating your difficult PR experiences based on values, because there's no playbook or guidebook that perfectly tells you what to do. You have to ask yourself, if I was inclusive and made sure that every voice mattered, how would I do this communication or change employee experience? So I think when I think about the evolving role of PR, it's less about just, I'm only doing external comms, I'm only doing internal comms, but you're really what is called a boundary spanner. So you do what it takes, right, to make sure that your organization is being purposeful, being very strategic, moving forward, and being in a learner mindset to just apply whatever you need to do to collaborate and make it happen. Yeah.
Right, thank you so much, Brian and Jejun. I think those were really great practices, especially focusing on clarity, transparency, and also including empathy with it. I think they are great steps to putting workplace inclusivity closer. So moving on to CP, I think based on what Jejun and Brian has mentioned, how do you think can personally manage diverse teams across different backgrounds and generations?
This has been a very common challenge nowadays in organization. I think the first, and I don't want to read about the work personally. I don't know whether there's a difference in doing it professionally or doing it personally. But I think a lot of times you can be guided by your own experiences, right? When you are part of a team, right? You're part of a diverse team, and how does it feel if, let's say, and there's always this thing about the minority and the majority, right? And for some of us here, born and bred in Singapore, if you're in certain races like myself, you have always been, in a way, in the majority, right? And some of us might be in the minority, and your own personal experiences will somehow influence you, right? How you see things personally. And of course, then you have, your professional role. So for me, I'm a HR person, right? So there are always certain expectations around how my profession, right, will require me to be able to facilitate, right? Very simple thing, like for example, getting employees, right, from diverse background to be able to work together. So I would say, personally for myself, I often remind myself that, while I need to represent the company, professionally in some ways, and there are certain things that, out in open, I might not want to openly challenge or say, say for example, right, you may have certain employees who may not be so open about, or rather they have certain body languages, right, that might not come across as being inclusive, right, and then it's regardless of whether they are senior or junior, right. I mean, of course, if you are senior staff, then the kind of body languages will be more frowned upon, right? But any negative type of body languages if it's being done, it's being displayed, right? A very common reaction is, hey, why are you doing this? And we want to address it on the spot. But often, coming as a person, right, from the so-called the lack of better word, the majority race here in Singapore as a Chinese, right? It's a blind spot sometimes, right? It's not the person, it's the way they are being brought up and the exposure that they get. And this can be kind of compounded as well, right? Because we all know how the Singapore system here is, right? Our school is based on, we love the word meritocracy. Yeah, I personally I don't like the word, but anyway, it's a word, right? And somehow, and I will say this, right? Those of us who are here today, you are students here in NTU, right? You belong to probably about 10%, 15% of your generation, right? In terms of how you perform in school. And as you grow up, right, you probably have already realized, right? You tend to converge towards certain profile of fellow students who then become your friends, all right? Maybe friends for life, even, right? And you get into this whole very narrow view of what life is. So then what would that create, right? That create a lot of blind spots. So professionally, I feel that, sometimes we need to call out some of these behaviors. But then personally, you empathize with those who might be demonstrating this behavior unknowingly, right? And so there's always this thing that we call, right, having side conversations, or having the opportunity to socialize, right, and to encourage individuals who might be uncomfortable, right, in certain workplace setting, to be more open, right, and for certain individuals who might come from, who might be in certain more, or belong to the bigger group of people to kind of reach out more to individuals who might be holding back to reach out. So to answer the question, in a more succinct way is that, it's a lot of conversations to encourage diverse group of people to be open, right, in terms of, it starts with communication, right, and to also acknowledge the kind of blind spots that individuals may have, right, because of their upbringing and their background. Yeah.
Thank you. I think CP really brought up a very valid point on being part of the majority or the minority and bring up all the blind spots because everyone is different. So there are things that certain individuals went through and we don't even know about it. So I believe that communication is really key and listening and understanding with them and really knowing how to engage with them. So thank you for your sharing. So moving on to a more related question, I'd like to ask Brian on how organizations can start building a culture where everyone feels heard. So for example, how do you think the organizations can start building a culture where every employee feels heard and build a culture of listening and understanding?
Okay, I think there were quite a few questions inside that question. Let me try my best to answer. I think earlier on I spoke about, kind of the approach of setting clear expectations. So I will tackle this question more on the second and third part, right? Where, be it, how do you bring about change? So if you take an organization like the one that I'm in, right, in UOB, we have more than 30,000 employees across the group. Very, very different geographies, very, very different stages of national development. So how do you deal with that, convergence, if we oversimplify, right? Then, for me, I think you have to approach this acknowledging the complexity. That actually, I always come from a position that I assume I don't understand, right? And that drives you to seek to understand, right? If I may be colloquial. And that's really about, kind of tapping on what CP is saying. At a micro level, it's about talking to each other. At a macro level, I'm dealing with a lot of people. Not always possible to speak to everyone, but not impossible, right? So there are tools in which you can use. So like I say, the evaluation or the measurement feedback loop is really important. sometimes you start with that measurement before you even try to maybe solve the problem is not the right term, right? Or find the right solution and choose the right path, right? So in my mind, approach it accepting the complexity and accept that therefore you need quite a bespoke approach depending on what the state of affairs are. And you know, in basic change management, I'm not sure if you guys are exposed to it, probably some of you are. The change management process always starts with building awareness, right? If you don't have awareness, be it at the organizational level or individual level, then there's no starting point, right? So if it's as simple as saying, okay, if you're going to go from point A to point B, where are you now, right? Is the first question to ask. So if you are not at point A, nor are you at point B, maybe you have a problem, right? Maybe you're halfway through, maybe you're not, right? So it all depends. And I think that realization then allows you to tailor your intervention accordingly. Very often, people want to be heard, but people actually don't really know what they want, right? I always have this wonderful question that I ask in interviews, especially with the more entry-level or early career folks. And very often, I get a very interesting answer like, no, I want to learn. I want to do new things. Then I say, then you don't, then the world is your oyster. You don't need to apply for this job. Maybe you should just go and try something else, right? Maybe, so I think very often that is the state of affairs. It's easy for people to talk about what they don't like. It's hard for them to be clear with what they really want, right? So as professionals, I think, as you talk about PR, you probably can apply the same logic, right? What does the media want to know, right? Really? They want to know the truth? Okay, maybe, right? But you need to find a way to identify the real pain points that is within the employee group or whatever the setting is. And from there, you have to get clear, right? I mean, if I use again a very technical way of looking at it, you have to define the problem, right? And if you can define the right problem, you will find the right solution, right? Very often solutions don't come about because we have made the wrong assumptions or we have made the wrong observations. So in my mind, if I go back again to try and answer a question, and we have been on the path of trying to continuously enhance our culture at UOB. So with 30,000 plus employees of very diverse background, we take everything, we accept the complexity and we take it very seriously, right? Maybe I relate an anecdote with you. In my team, we also run performance management for the whole group. And every year, we want to identify the employees who need help, people who don't perform well. Okay. So in our world, we have a rating scale of 1 to 5. So if you're in 1 or 2, means that there's a gap in performance. So every year, we do a summarization of, and we have our fair share of 3 to 5% of the population being in that category. Over the years, I think we have gotten a bit more sophisticated. We used to look at it as, there's 5%, we need to find a way to help them, blah, 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 right? And as we look at the data more and more, these days we're looking at, hey, there seems to be a pattern, there seems to be an over-representation of people of a certain age group. Is that random or is that some systemic discrimination that could be happening? Right? We come back to this topic. And so we did a lot more analysis. We asked a lot more questions. In the end, okay, I guess the good news is, at least from our perspective, was that there wasn't a real systemic identification of poor performers. They had long service or of more senior age, right? But the initial view was, yeah, there seems to be a pattern, and that was a concern. But sharing back into the first answer I gave, that it is a journey. I've been in this organization for more than 12 years. I can tell you that it has indeed been a journey. These were not topics that we were very sensitive to in the past. I think today it's a whole new different lens. I think it's like, I'm not sure if you are familiar with the concept of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you oversimplify, you're kind of progressing along the value chain, right? You satisfy the lower level needs, and as you go, you start looking at things that are maybe more conceptual, more philosophical, right? And I think that, to me, that's a positive sign that we have progressed, and I would say we are probably a microcosm of the general corporate environment in Singapore and Asia. So, yeah, it's maybe a very roundabout way of trying to answer your question. Hopefully, I have. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Brian, for your insights. I think he really touched on the point of evaluating and knowing where you place at, so you can at least know where you can start and continue progressing towards workplace inclusivity. So for the next question, I'd like to ask Jie-Jun about this. Because you lead Edelman's employer branding efforts, right? In your experience, what are some of the most common challenges to effective employer branding?
Yeah, okay. So just to clarify, because everyone uses the terms very differently, so when I talk about employer brand, it's about the communication of the content and the creative expression of what differentiates the organization's employer, which is different from employee value proposition, the reason why, the social contract, why you should join as a talent in the company. So when we talk about the communication of the content and the creative expression, what I find interesting, and we're working with a couple of employers in Singapore as well as Asia Pacific, is it's really critical to be authentic. So sometimes we're doing everything from researching the potential talent segments, to helping them define their employee value proposition, to crafting their creative campaign, then executing it. Sometimes I just ran a workshop for the top 20 leaders of a company, and they got very excited and they started wanting to change our research insights into aspirational statements that they felt were their company. And we had to play that creative tension of keeping them authentic, that we had done the research with the existing employees and potential talent. And they had a lot of good things about them, but there were certain things that the leaders wanted imbibe into the messages which didn't feel authentic, it didn't feel resonated. So thankfully the leaders were good listeners. They understood there has to be a very data-driven approach to authentic communication of your brand. So they were very open to say, okay, let's make edits, we'll test it with our existing employees, some potential talent, and the final version, of course, you be the arbiter to make sure that it's authentic. So that's great. A second point as well is we are finding that a lot of companies are not just needing the refresh post-COVID, because really not just, I would say, Gen Z want different things from employers, but you'll be surprised, different generations and different job segments are wanting different things as well, right? So I think all of us know across the board is, I think if you're asking people to come in 5 days a week into office, it's really difficult to sell that. So we're working with a hardware engineering company. It's really challenging for them. They do night shifts and they have to. It's a 24-hour factory that's producing, like semiconductor products that's really critical to function in every IoT, phone, EV, vehicle. And you do need those night shifts. So they have the complex challenge of, we have high engagement scores, low retention, but it's so difficult to attract Singaporeans who are willing to do night shift and willing to work in a more male-dominated environment. So it's quite interesting, because I think one of the challenges a company like that faces is that increasingly they need to figure out how to target the right employee segment in the right channels, the right messages, but also the right HR policies and processes. So again, what I am finding is that communication experts need to partner with HR to make sure that you do what it takes. You communicate effectively about the employer brand that's authentic, and you work very closely with HR to make sure that the HR policies and processes happen. And as they push out new kinds of policies and processes to address the issues, the PR job is to make sure that you're story mining those proof points and able to communicate out there, this is how you're changing as a company. You're very inclusive, you want to attract really difficult talent, and these are the changes that you're making. So employer brand is really an evolving process. It's not something static. And I always tell the HR clients, like, it's totally okay if you're not there yet. But if you're just very clear, this is your level of ambition, it's authentic, you have an activation plan, then the communication people help you build those communication blocks along the way.
Thank you so much. I think she had a very, very valid point on understanding like how your employees can actually change. How you can actually work for change towards workplace inclusivity, and those are very common challenges, and it's very hard to really find the right solution. It's really a progressive journey, so I really appreciate your insights. In the view of time, I would like to ask CP one final question before we proceed with the Q&A. So for CP, with the passing of the Workplace Fairness Bill, how do you see the role of communication evolving in workplace culture?
Do a bit of poll here. How many of you know about this bill? And especially now. And we have national media talking about this bill for quite a while now. So that's just kind of show you the challenge, right? That a lot has to be done in the way of not just communicating this bill, but of course looking at how to get people to pay attention to it. Right? I mean, everyone corrected that this is the workplace fairness legislation. It's called a bill now because it's going through another reading in July, and probably will become a legislation that can be enforced next year. If you ask me, it's a lot about how to get people to see the importance of this, and of course with that you look at the different stakeholders, and I feel that an act is an act, right? Just a bunch of a stack of documents with legalistic words, right? What does it actually mean? Then it has to be something that the various stakeholders have to really think for themselves. What does this mean to you, right? From employer perspective. Now, a lot of times, one may think that, in order to create, let's say, a fair workplace, right? Why don't we just put everything? Why don't we just use law, right, to mandate everything, right? But of course, once you do that, right, then management, you'll be surprised to know that there is actually this effect, right? That if you put everything as a law, then companies may just do what is needed because of the law. And that's it, right? Just give the bare minimum. So as long as you don't get into trouble with law, that's it. And that's also the reason why some of you, if you have parents or seniors, right, or siblings who are just like the three of us here in HR, right? And you ask them about their view on our Employment Act, for example, right? There is a reason why certain things are quite big, right? For example, some of you may have read in the news, right? Retrenchment benefits, right? While the Singapore government has not mandated, right, the minimum amount to give, but companies have gotten into trouble when they try to, because you don't give me you don't mandate it, so I can decide how much I give. And I think the most famous example was a few months ago or last year, when one of the big e-commerce company that many of you have, or maybe all of us here, we have bought things from, right? They got into huge trouble because they gave less than what is known as the market practice, right? So I think it's really for the different stakeholders, right? On the way we communicate, that's number one, and number two is how do we get the stakeholders that will be that is what this law is about, right? This act is about, to get them to see, how they can use it, right, to their advantage. So employers can use this as an advantage that I'm doing above and beyond what is mandated by the law. So I'm progressive, right? We use the word progressive. If you are above and beyond the law, you are progressive, right? Employees like all of us here, right? Unless you are thinking of starting your own business when you graduate, right? You'll be an employee, right? And as an employee, how do you use this law to contribute, right, to a more diverse, or rather more inclusive workplace? And when you become a manager, how do you ensure that you practice, right? You encourage practices that will promote, what this law is aiming to do, right? Which is again to create an inclusive workplace and so on. Yeah.
Thank you, CP, for that. I think he's really true about how, just because a law was passed on doesn't mean that everything could change. It really depends on the stakeholders on how they aim to change everything, because at the end of the day, it really takes two hands to clap, and it's really up to the stakeholders to see what they want to do about it. So I really appreciate your insight so far. So from now, we'll be opening the floor to the audience for questions. So you can scan the QR code. Yeah, okay. So you can scan the QR code over there, and we can answer maybe one question.
It's really hard to see.
Yeah, okay. You can stand over here. Yeah. But not to worry if your questions were not answered. You can always catch them after the event at the networking session later. So don't worry about that. For CP, Brian, and Jiajun, if there are any questions that you'd like to answer, feel free to do so. Yeah.
Unless, can we see on our phones? Okay, wait.
Let's see.
Thank you. I saw my name on something. Okay. I'll try to answer the. Okay. Testing. Can I ask Yechun, as a change consultant, which aspects of the workplace aim to change and what has been done to improve them? Am I allowed to ask the person submitted to clarify what you would like me to share about? Maybe. Okay, perfect. Can you let me know, what are you thinking when you ask that question?
Which aspects of the workplace aim to change, and in your work, may I know what kinds of improvements has been done to change? Yeah, because change consultant. So I'm curious about the work of the change consultant.
Okay, got it. So actual experience. So maybe something I've been doing the last 2 years or something like that. Okay. So I mentioned that I think the biggest complex projects that the global MNCs are asking us to do is transformation related. So it ranges from things of a global pharmaceutical company where they've been doing R&D and then they want to launch new products in Japan. And Japan has a very long tenure workforce where they're not used to change. So they're making a lot of money selling the existing product. They don't want to learn a new product to sell because they're making good money already, but globally, because the innovation has to progress for better health outcomes for patients, they need to learn it. So they hired us because, first of all, their leadership was not on board with the change. Engagement was slow, leaders were confused, but why do we need change? It's going to hit our profit margin. So we kind of focus on, Brian said, the big change experience is what is the reason for the change, the big why. Do leaders, it's not about telling them, but do leaders truly believe in the reason for change? Do employees believe in the reason for change? And then I think some of you are familiar with the ProSci change management model, then desire or the emotional buy-in is very important. So do I want to be part of this journey? Now that I hear you tell me the reason for change, do I want to be part of the change journey? And then do I have the knowledge and the ability to change? So it was a multi-month process where together with that in-house innovation team, we ran a 1-week innovation session. And I would say that combining with the HR perspective, it was not just training them to learn design thinking, agile or innovation methods, but it was using training to engage them emotionally, to step into the shoes of the patients, to understand that the patients needed new products, to understand that the patients needed new patient experience journey experiences in order to reduce the pain points, to understand the new products and to make the right decisions on the healthcare products. So that is something that was very meaningful, and that kind of transformation tends to be multi-series. You know, they will come to you and say, okay, we need to engage the leaders, and then sometimes internally they try to do certain things themselves. Then they'll hit a roadblock and go like, oh, actually our 500 employees are still not really bought in. So then we'll go in, diagnose what the issues are, and then run a series of communications or workshops or different kinds of experiences to engage them. And then they'll hit another roadblock and go, oh, actually now we're restructuring a team and they need to learn new products. So can you run a workshop to help them create a new vision and purpose and bond together as a new team to do that? So that's one example of, for me, it's very fulfilling work to do that kind of stuff. And you never really know what exactly they need. We always go in to diagnose, I think all of you know as academics, you go in to define the problem statement, you do deep research, and then you figure out what exactly is the issue, then you develop the solution from there, you iterate, and then you continue on the process. So it's a very evolving, complex way of working right now with the clients.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I was originally hoping to answer the first question that was up there. Maybe I'll stick to it. I'll still stick to my choice, which is now the third question. So the question is that, would one wrong policy or one bad incident erase all the trust that may have been built over the years? Can I know who asked that question? Okay, so I'll try to answer. I think the short answer is kind of, the philosophy that I believe in, and, maybe just sharing the perspective. If you acknowledge that you don't really know the right answer all the time, and that you are prepared to react and respond to the effect of whatever that's happening, right? That you accept that you have limited control, then I think you would orientate your strategy and your policies in a way that will allow you to mitigate when things don't go right. So I share with you an example. So at UOB, years back, maybe 7-8 years ago, I introduced a policy, we call it Flexi 2, which was to give people 2 hours of flexible off time every month for them to go and deal with some emergency or need. So either they can leave earlier or they come later to work using that general 2 hours. Okay. So the intent of that policy was clearly pretty inclusive, right? We're thinking of maybe it's a family emergency, maybe you have caretaking responsibility, could be anything, could be you need to go to the gym earlier that day. And we thought it was a wonderful policy, right? So we launched it with a lot of fanfare, and indeed a lot of people were happy. Then what happened is there's such a thing called business, right? And business operations are quite different across the bank. So there are teams that have to, for example, at my branches, they serve customers. You can't just close the branch or your counter 2 hours earlier because HR's got this 2-hour policy, right? So very often what we discovered very quickly was that policy could not be implemented across the board, right? There were operational functions that struggled. Okay. So what did we do? Taking a pragmatic view is we told the functions that then it can't apply to you. Okay. So you can imagine the backlash, right? That come from quite a big group of employees. They're saying, hey, this is not fair, right? You are doing this to, I don't get it, other people get it, right? And so the question, right? So what happens? Does that mean that all the good work that we've been doing in terms of building that trust between employees and the employer has gone to waste? The truth is, it definitely has an impact, right? So I would argue that there are many things that you do that will have unintended consequences. So the first thing you need to realize, and I keep emphasizing this, right? It's that feedback, that ability to know what's going on, what emotions are going on, how are people receiving this or rejecting this. You must find as many avenues as possible to get reliable information and data. Because if you don't have that, for example, I wouldn't know that if the ops team or the branches had no channel to inform me that this is a problem, it could have gone unnoticed for months and employees could get really upset and they could have left and so on and so forth, right? So because I was able to have that, in that particular episode, we went down and talked to the leaders of the functions involved. And we then problem solve with them to say, okay, if we can't give this like we would do for others, what is the workaround? So in the end, we broke it down into half an hour blocks or hour blocks that we then allow employees to have that flexibility to make use of it. So it, to a certain extent, mitigated the issue, but nevertheless, it didn't solve everything for everybody. But through that, the willingness to adjust, that willingness to reflect and change your policy, or to look at an incident and respond accordingly. I think in PR talk, is it called crisis management or service recovery in some other talks, right? So it's essentially having that mindset that you could be wrong, and so when you're wrong, you're not surprised. You actually would be able to deal with it better, and that you have built in that willingness from the beginning. So you don't go with a policy. I mean, the government tends to issue a policy from a very top-down perspective. I'm a believer that in this day and age, I don't think a pure top-down approach will be effective. Yeah, so that would be my answer. Hopefully I've answered the question. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. I think if there are any more questions, you can definitely catch them after the event itself. And I really love to ask more questions, but we are really short of time. So with that brings us to the end of panel 1. And once again, let's thank our speakers, CP, Brian, and Jia-Jun for their time once again.
Let's put our hands together once again to thank CP, Brian, Jia-Jun, and Sarah for their insightful discussion. This next panel is curated in light of the world entering the era of Digital 4.0. Although there are undeniable benefits, these are unfortunately accompanied by the growing risks of data mismanagement and breaches. This panel will explore the emerging threats that organizations may face as they transition their business operations to a digitalized environment. Our two industry experts will share strategies for securing data, discuss proactive approaches for mitigating mismanagement risks, and offer best practices for effectively managing data crises when they arise. Our first panelist is Mr. Darren Chung, who is the Regional Data Protection Director at Electrolux. Darren has had a myriad of experiences, which includes guiding the Integrated Health Information Systems, also known as IHIS, through the COI's inquiry and the PDPC's investigations during the 2018 SingHealth cyber attack. He also worked with the internal corporate communications departments and external crisis professionals to communicate with the public throughout. In his subsequent role at the PDPC, he had the opportunity to view data incidents, media reports, company statements from the other side of the table. Now, he currently heads the Privacy and Compliance Department in APMEA, where he leads incident response for the region. Next, we have Josh Lee. Josh is the APAC Managing Director of the Future of Privacy Forum and advisor for the Technology, Media and Telecommunications Department at Raja & Tan Asia. He was formerly a policymaker in the Singapore government and an international arbitration lawyer. Beyond his current roles, Josh also chairs the Asia Pacific Legal Innovation and Technology Association, co-founded LawTech.Asia, and serves on Singapore's Media Literacy Council and Law Reform Subcommittee for Robotics and AI. He also teaches AI law and ethics at SMU's Yong Peng Hao School of Law. Josh also holds a Master of Law degree in Law and Technology from Berkeley Law, where he was a Richard Buchsbaum Fellow and made the Dean's List. He graduated from SMU Law in 2015 and was called to the Singapore Bar in 2016. Together with Aloysius, may I invite the both of you on stage to begin our second panel for the day.
Hello, testing. Thank you, Saman, for the introduction. My name is Aloysius, and I'll be the moderator of this panel discussion. Today, we have the privilege of being joined by Josh and Darren, both of whom are industry leaders in the field of data management and privacy protection. As many of us are communication students and aspiring PR professionals, this panel will delve into the intersection between data management and communications, such as the current data policies in place, how companies can handle and manage data breaches, and how professionals can navigate data mismanagement in this era of digitalization. If you have any questions during the panel, please input them into our Slido, and we'll address them during the 10-minute Q&A at the end. So without further ado, let's begin. Hi, Josh and Darren. A pleasure to have the both of you with us today. To start us off, could the both of you just give a brief introduction about yourself, your job scopes, and what you're currently doing in the company?
Testing. Oh wow, I thought your classmate gave a very long introduction already. I think can skip me.
Maybe just a little bit on like your job scope, like what you've been doing in your company so far.
Okay. So currently I'm the Regional Data Protection Director for Asia Pacific, Middle East and Africa at Electrolux. My main job scope concerns privacy, so I handle two kinds of things. One is privacy advisory, so giving legal advice in relation to data protection laws, how to comply with them. The second, I call it branch, is data protection officer kind of work. So making sure all the little policies, processes are done. Because I mean, okay, so the law can say something, you are supposed to do this, you're not supposed to do this, and usually it's very high level. But how do you implement it within a company? How do you get the company to comply? That's where we have to draft, we have to think, okay, what are the exact instructions we need to tell people to do so that the company is in compliance. So it's really until step by step, very minute and granular in detail. So that's the kind of work I do at Electrolux. And increasingly, because data protection is getting combined with data and AI and even cybersecurity, so my scope is slowly expanding outwards to these areas as well.
Thank you so much, Darren. Josh, a little bit about yourself.
Sure, happy to share. Hi everyone, thanks so much again for having me. Really great to see all of you here. Reminds me of how I teach at SMU, except the lecture theatre is not so high, but it's still a bit more of a seminar room rather than this lecture hall. But glad to see all of you nonetheless. I think it's going to be exam time soon, is it? Okay, I see some of you nodding with, and I hear a yes from the room, quite depressing yes, so okay, I understand. I will try and keep this, let's try and keep this interesting for them. Okay, so what do I do on a day-to-day basis? Well, I work at the Future of Privacy Forum, or FPF for short. FPF is what you might call in this region a think tank. It is a non-profit organization. What I focus on is, well, privacy is my company's middle name. Privacy, data protection, AI regulation. On a day-to-day basis, it comprises really reading and following up on latest regulatory and legal developments, policy developments around the Asia-Pacific region, analyzing them, understanding how they compare between different countries and jurisdictions within APEC and outside of APEC, and giving advice and heads up information to our companies. I speak a lot to governments and regulators as well, because they will ask us, so what are other countries doing and how should we chart forward in this space? So that's a group that we speak closely as well, and we try and convene. We hold events so that we can convene regulators, government, industry, as well as civil society and academia to come together to have trusted conversations. As you can tell from the introduction just now, oftentimes in the day, my work keeps me very busy, but at night my backside itchy. So a lot of things to do on the side as well. So I publish on the virtual publication called Law Tech Asia. That's my own virtual publication that I've been running since 2016. I teach on the side and also follow up on conversations on law and technology just generally and bringing people like Darren as a senior fellow onto FPF as well. So yeah, on a day-to-day basis, that essentially is what I do. I just want to say that very happy that the course, We Can Be School, is doing such talks, industry talks, for students like you, going out into the comms and PR profession in the future, because it's really, really important, and I'm sure we'll dive more into that later.
Thank you so much for sharing, Josh. So I think just to set the context a little bit for everyone over here, could the both of you just help to share why data management is becoming so important for companies? And could you also share an incident on data mismanagement that has significant implications on an organization? Shall we start with you first, Darren?
Because I said in compliance, data management is important so you can comply with the law. I mean, okay, but besides complying with the law, I mean, put yourself in the shoes of a consumer. You don't want the company you share your personal data with to mismanage your personal data, right? So you can look at it from both ways, from the shoes of the consumer, and also when you're working for the company, then make sure you take all the consumer concerns into account when you manage data.
The second one is, could you share an incident from an organization that you've encountered before regarding data mismanagement?
Okay, I just thinking whether it has to be my organization or some other organization. My organization, I think, cannot really say lah. But mismanagement is very particular, because there can be all kinds of data incidents and something that's really not your fault. So okay, maybe I'll give you a common case of mismanagement. That is when you're sending personal data out by email, say for example an Excel file with lots of personal data inside. Then you type in an email address of someone you're not supposed to send the personal data to. That's a good example of mismanagement, and it's happened in many cases. There are even PDPC decisions about it, so if you're interested, you can go and search.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, it's really insightful to hear of all the little things that can happen to us, like sending things in Excel, like he's mentioned, which I'm sure a lot of us do on a daily basis as well. For you, Josh?
Sure, thank you. I just want to say that I realize on this panel, so that both of us are lawyers. Frankly, I personally feel like a fish out of water. Normally, when I give talks, it's to rooms, in rooms where people are mostly in policy or in law. So here, amongst all of you, comms experts and PR experts, and when we talk about comms and PR, I'm a bit scared, a bit nervous. But let me try and make it a bit more relational, right? So for me, people ask me, so as a lawyer, what do you do? What does being a lawyer mean to you? To me, lawyer, very simple, right? It's not about applying the law to facts. It's not about advising people. I see lawyers as fundamentally as architects. We are architects of societal relationships, because law is essentially societal relationships. And when these societal relationships are disrupted by technology, I see my role as a lawyer to be an architect to reshape these relationships after they've been disrupted by technology. Now, we think about comms and PR. Again, I don't really know this space as much, but you can think of yourselves as architects also, right? You guys are architects of societal discourse, right? You think about what messaging should go out there. You think about how the public should receive an information, and you shape what the conversations will be like. You won't shape individual conversations, but you will shape the overall tenor of conversations. So I think that's the first point I wanted to say. Now, Aloysius, you asked about data management and mismanagement. I'm going to step out more broadly and to talk about data protection and data governance generally. Why? It's an easy way, because I want to escape. I haven't personally dealt with any data mismanagement cases before, because I worked in PDPC, Personal Data Protection Commission, we were colleagues once, but I worked specifically on AI, so I didn't really work on data policy. And then in FPF, I worked more on shaping policies and regulations rather than dealing with the aftermath of them, so which is why I want this escape route. But to give you all some context, you all understand, have you all read about data protection laws before? Have, okay, I see one nod, that means you guys know life. The rest got life. I'm just kidding. We both have no life, that's why we can commiserate, that's why we're good friends. Okay, what is data protection law? Data protection law fundamentally relates to a balance between, as a data subject, you guys own your own personal data, having control over that personal data, and balanced against organizations' ability and right to use that personal data to improve their services and to provide products and services to you. Fundamentally, if you go around the world, whether they call it privacy law, they call it data protection law, that is fundamentally what I'm talking about. When you look at data protection laws, there is a unique fingerprint around the world. Usually, These laws will say, in order to use your personal data, there must be a certain permission. Permission often comes in the form of consent. So you see all those consent policies, privacy policies, they ask for your consent, right? That is a fundamental tenet, a fundamental pillar of data protection laws. But you don't consent to everything, right? You consent only to specific purposes, right? So there are provisions that relate to limitations. So companies will only be allowed to use the personal data for the purposes for which they sought consent from you from, right? Then there will be obligations on having to secure that personal data. What happens if there is a data breach? That's also something that they deal with. As a data subject, you have rights in that data. So can you get access to that data? Can you correct that data? Can you delete that data? Right? So these are some obligations. Other obligations that exist, because data has to flow, right? Not just within Singapore, but outside of Singapore. So there are provisions that deal with cross-border data transfers. Okay? Companies and countries transfer data from one country or one locality to another locality, and what are the rules in play. That fundamentally is the overall shape of what data protection laws look like. It's difficult, and this gives me a job, so I'm very happy, right? Because different countries have, they're all trying to fundamentally balance between innovation and data protection, innovation and privacy. But there are many different approaches to it. Someone take a very protectionist, very focused on protecting personal data sort of approach. Others, like Singapore, for example, on the other end of the spectrum, more innovation focused, more open, allowing data to flow and so on. So these approaches make it very interesting across the region. I'll close down to this point. So I want to talk about Singapore and why this is relevant to you. We put aside data protection concepts for a moment. I think that fundamentally, when we're talking about these conversations, fundamentally we're talking about digital trust, right? Can we trust the technologies that we are using? And it's difficult because when you look at the iPhone, you look at your laptops in front of you, you can't trust it because you can't see what is going on underneath it. It's bits and bytes. So how do you develop digital trust? Well, PR, in your classes, you would learn concepts about transparency, accuracy, accountability, right? These are, I'm guessing, right, concepts that they would say important for comms experts to pay attention to. Well, these concepts exist in data protection laws too. For example, in the Singapore PDPA, there is an accuracy obligation, so you need the data to be accurate as far as reasonably possible. There is an accountability obligation, where organizations need to be accountable, putting in place, for example, a data protection officer that you can get in touch with when there's a data breach. There is also concepts like notification, consent, purpose limitation. I said this just now. This relates to transparency, because organizations need to be transparent with you how they're using your data. So in short, these concepts that you learn as public comms experts are relevant also for data protection. And I'll just close with this. And you want to talk about data mismanagement case, right? I hope we don't get too many questions on this, but one recent thing that came up was the NRIC incident. So when you look at, I bet none of you read the review panel recommendations, so I'm going to read out one section for you. One of the final recommendations and things that they pointed out was that there were some communication failures when the news was put out to the public. And I'll read this to you. Public communications in the aftermath of the incident on the correct users of NRIC number should also have been clearer. In hindsight, the government should have made clear to the public at the outset that moving away from the use of partial NRIC numbers did not automatically mean using full NRIC numbers in every case, blah, 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 blah. Doing so would have helped to reassure the public that NRIC numbers remain personal data, which should only be collected, used, or disclosed when there is a need to do so. So my point here is that I don't know so much about the nitty-gritty of data mismanagement, but I'm trying to tell you here that data protection and what you do, public comms, is really inseparable. There's an element that is inseparable there. And when you guys go out into tech companies next time in the future, I hope you don't face data breaches, but if you do, you'll have a very, very busy week. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Josh, for setting the foundation for data policy as well as linking it to a lot of PR implications and communication problems that communication practitioners will be facing in the future. So now that we've heard from you with a little bit of legal perspective, maybe we can hear from Darren, who has personally experienced data mismanagement crisis. So how do the various teams within a company like legal, IT, security, and communications collaborate during a data mismanagement crisis?
During the data incident, collaboration between the various teams is critical for many reasons. One is, for example, there are usually regulatory timelines we need to work within. So we all need to work very closely and quickly together to assess what we're dealing with. There are two reasons. One is for your own mental preparedness so you're prepared, okay, if it's a small thing, okay, then don't need to stress out so much. If it's a big thing, then you really get stressed and then all your instincts will kick in for the more experienced ones. You quickly prepare a mental list of what you need to do. And the second reason, of course, is that you need to start preparing to gather all the facts to brief senior management, senior leadership, for them to make a decision. So starting with IT and cybersecurity, they need to find out and tell us very factually what happened. Was it a hack? Was it ransomware? What IT systems are involved? Does the IT system belong to us? Is that our vendor's breach? Does the IT system belong to our vendor? Is any data involved? Personal data, company confidential data, because this will affect what legal does. And then has the breach been contained? Is the clock to pay ransom still ticking, or is the clock finished already? Based on that, legal also will take different decisions. For the legal team and maybe a separate compliance team, they will assess regulatory impact. So for example, any laws require the company to notify authorities or affected individuals. It could be under a cybersecurity law, it could be under data protection laws. Is it limited to one jurisdiction, one country, Singapore? Or is it a multi-jurisdictional thing, Singapore, Malaysia, US, Europe? In that case, a whole lot of other different laws will kick in. And then is the breach, of course, our vendor's breach, or is it our own data breach? If it's the vendor's breach, what does our contract with the vendor say? What does it say about their legal obligations, their obligations to assist us, and their obligations to cooperate with us in our notification to authorities or affected individuals? Can we be sued for the breach? These are a couple of things that the legal team will be assessing. Then when it comes to comms, right? Comms is in charge of messaging. And okay, it's not always that comms is involved. It's not always that comms is going to be involved from the start. It's usually only for cases which involve personal data or for highly regulated companies. And then when it comes to messaging, it's also not just about messaging to external parties like the public, your consumers, your customers. It's also about employees. Don't forget your internal employees, and explain to them what happened before the media reports about it. And then teaching your employees also how to respond to media inquiries, because I know sometimes the media will go and send journalists to hang around at the workplace and catch employees and ask them questions. That's happened to us before. that's how I know. And we rely on comms. Legal relies on comms to prepare this messaging to employees, individuals affected by the breach, customers, the media. We all work closely together to ensure that the messaging is accurate. The narrative is aligned with our legal narrative, and it does not get us into legal trouble. There's one more important team, which is the leadership team, senior management, who looks at the overall impact to the company. For example, how does this affect the company's operations, shareholder value, reputation, consumer trust? And they are in charge of making many decisions in relation to, for example, whether to notify authorities, what's the content of the messaging into different audiences. So there's going to be a lot of rapid information sharing within a very short span of time across different teams. It's very important to ensure that we are working off the same facts, accurate facts, and the messaging is aligned. And usually, I mean, it's not like people will rely on experience and there's nothing to guide them. Most companies should have, or it must have, an incident response policy which will tell you what you're supposed to do from start to the end, and tell you who's involved and what the roles and responsibilities are, so that you know exactly what you're supposed to do.
So after hearing this, I hope you all don't regret not going to law school and instead coming to do communications and PR. Because you can see the law part is the boring part and the comms part is the exciting part.
Thank you so much, Darren, for giving such like a detailed breakdown of all the different divisions, and Josh too for your insight in law versus communication.
No, it's not insight. It's just please take this home as a general knowledge and assurance that your life is in good hands. It's in a better state than mine. Our lives definitely.
Okay, so Darren, since you mentioned communications and you spoke about the fact that it's not just about external stakeholders, but there are a lot of internal stakeholders as well. Could you just help to elaborate a little bit more on how these organizations can communicate with these stakeholders when a data breach occurs?
Different stakeholders? Okay, how should? Okay, we are talking about how should communications be done. I think basically there are two principles. One is tell the truth, and the two is don't tell lies. Beyond that, right, I think it can be very dependent on company philosophy and individual philosophy as to how much you want to say, how you're going to say it, and my personal opinion and my personal philosophy is as much transparency as possible, as long as it doesn't get the company into trouble. So communication should be clear in a plain language that people can understand easily. The ordinary person on the street should be able to understand, not filled with legalese or confusing terms that actually don't mean anything. It must be accurate, it must be timely, and if it's your breach notifications to people involved, right, then make sure you comply with regulatory timelines. The lawyers involved will advise on that. The communication should also address if the breach has already been contained or what steps are being taken to address the breach. Because I don't think you should go out with bad news and make people panic and then just leave people hanging there without knowing what you're going to do about the breach, what actions are being taken, right? And lastly, I think the communication should also say what affected individuals can do, what they can take to protect themselves. For example, if their personal data has been taken, what they can do to secure their accounts, things like that. And in general, messaging must be careful to avoid breaching any confidentiality obligations of the company that could arise, for example, from contractual obligations. And communications professionals also need to be careful about unintentionally admitting liability. So that's why it takes a lot of close cooperation with legal to work on messaging.
Thank you so much, Darren. I think it's, of course, something that is really insightful when you mention things about transparency and even mentioning things about how they have to collaborate with legal and things like that, which is super important in the case of data management crisis. So for Josh, since you're more of an expert in the policy side, what are some of the existing policies or regulations that are currently in place to protect data that you are aware of or you think is very significant currently?
I think that all of the data protection obligations and policies that are out there do play an important role in ensuring that data is governed and managed properly. So I mentioned about consent and notification obligations just now. This basically provides consumers with control and ensures that you guys are notified about how your data is used. There is purpose limitation I mentioned, which ensures that the data is only used for the purpose for which consent is collected. There is security obligation, which requires organizations to put in place reasonable security measures, like technological measures, administrative measures, process-based measures, to ensure that the data is kept as secure as possible, and data breach notification obligations. Who has heard of data breach obligation notifications before? Okay, good. Confirms that all of you have a life. So data breach notification obligations basically means these are fundamental, aspects that exist in data protection laws. And this is what I wanted to say. I think one of the key aspects of data protection laws when it comes to data mismanagement is probably data breach notifications. What it means is that it's not about preventing data breaches. It's when you have a data breach, when it crosses a certain threshold of severity, usually sometimes when it relates to certain kind of data that has been breached, or a certain number of people's data has been breached. In Singapore, it's 500 and above. The organization is obligated to report that data breach to the regulator and all the affected data subjects. So that's what Darren was mentioning about just now. That's a data breach notification, right? And you are supposed to say what data has been breached, what has been inadvertently shared, how it happened, what does the company know up to that point in time, what are the mitigation measures that your company is planning to take. So I think that's an important aspect within the whole data governance and data protection space that helps to ensure that there's a bit more data management post-incident. But Aloysius, if I may, I wanted to turn to a point, right, which I think I wanted to touch on. One of the things that we discussed during our pre-panel session was, how do you make data policies more interesting? And I want to be frank here. Even if you made data policies the most interesting document ever, no one's going to read them, sorry, right? I'll give you an example of a very interesting privacy policy I've come across. Go and check out BBC's privacy policy for Doctor Who, for the Doctor Who series, HOW, Doctor Who. Clause 2A of the policy says, by leaving your message with the doctor, you agree that the doctor and the BBC, A, will be able to record and broadcast your message, including over the radio, online and social media, and you assign the BBC all rights in your message for use worldwide and on any other planets in perpetuity. On any other planets. I think people don't even realize that because they don't even go through, and I don't blame you, because most people would skip right through, right, and just jump straight to the product or the service. So that is one of the challenges of data protection frameworks today. It is fundamentally consent-based. That means it requires you to give your consent and then the organization can use it. And this gives rise to what people know in the ecosystem as consent fatigue. Because every single platform, technology, service out there will ask you for your consent. How are you supposed to keep track of what's going on? It's totally at odds with how the digital landscape is like. For now, we just want to go straight to the digital activity, and we cannot, even if we wanted to, we cannot simply process how our data is being used in all these different platforms and services. So there is increasingly a move towards data protection frameworks which are accountability-based. Accountability-based means you shift the obligation of understanding from the consumer to the organization. So as I said just now, the organization needs to have a data protection officer. If something goes wrong, you as a consumer can go to that DPO to get the answers you need. If something goes wrong like a data breach, the obligation is on the company to go and explain to the regulator, not on the consumer to call out the organization, right? So there is that right. Doesn't mean that consent is not important. Consent is still important, but there are also ways in which you can provide that consent. Darren mentioned a great example earlier regarding how you can provide simple language. A few other things that companies around the world have been doing, for example, include layered consent. What is layered consent? That means that when you look at the app, it doesn't mean that the moment you sign up, you get a privacy policy, you click the checkbox and then you get in, and then that's it. It means that every single time you go past a certain layer, then a consent notification pops up to tell you, we are using data for this purpose. So at least it arises in context. Another way that you can arise in context is, if you are just seeking information about what data the app is processing, the company can just give you a broad explanation of what kind of data they are collecting about you. They don't need to go into, let's say, specific categories of data that they are collecting about you. But if you want to challenge a decision, then maybe at that point in time they should provide more context and more information to you. So that refers to contextual information that depends on what you want to use that information for. The final point I would say is, when you are only thinking about communicating to your audience, when you're thinking about privacy policies, data breach notification, like, friends, too late already. Instead, sometimes the messaging and the positioning comes even before that. It comes throughout the entire life cycle when you're communicating with your consumers. I'll give you one last example and I'll close here, right? Do any of you know what Apple's privacy statement says? No one knows, right? I also don't know. They are FPF member, but I also don't know what their privacy policy says. But do you remember the ad that says privacy? That's Apple. You do. So sometimes this messaging matters more than messaging at the data at the privacy policy stage, which is why you need to think about communicating and sharing your organization's stance on these policies upfront throughout the entire consumer lifecycle. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Josh. I think what you mentioned, a lot of the examples you gave are very prominent, and of course, they're things that are of course very important to us as communication professionals as well. So thank you so much for shedding light on the data policies as well as bridging that together with the PR communication side. So in the interest of time, and unfortunately we don't have a lot of it left, one of the last questions, I think we'll direct this towards Darren, would be, so in lieu of all of this, how can organizations proactively prepare themselves to better navigate a data mismanagement crisis when it occurs?
Okay, preparation is very important. Cannot emphasize enough. Because when an incident happens, when a breach happens, the last thing you want to do is for people to panic and run all over the place, kalang kabut, and then don't know what to do, or accidentally leak out to everyone, or your employees leak out because they have not been trained to keep things confidential. That's the last thing. So, prep on the legal side, IT security and leadership. Number one, we need to have an incident response plan that goes from the very start of it, when, say for example, when a staff detects an incident, when they suspect something has happened, then report it, escalate it, down to the very end where the matter is finally closed. This plan needs to define who's involved, what the different roles and responsibilities are, who makes the ultimate decision. And then within this plan itself, right, it's not going to be like a one-page thing that's very short. Usually it can take out a couple of pages because it's going to be very detailed. Sometimes there's even a workflow or process flow which tells you, okay, step 1 do this, step 2 do this, step 3 do this. Together with this incident response plan, usually there's going to be a crisis communications plan. It may be available to the whole company, or it may only be available to the comms department, because I don't think the whole company needs to know usually lah. Number 3, train employees on incident response and make sure they understand their roles and obligations. Number 4, we need to test the incident response process to make sure it's working, and also test the crisis communications plan. So usually this takes place through something called tabletop exercises, where people sit in a room around tables and simulate an incident or breach that has happened. And that's where you test that people know exactly what their roles are and what they are supposed to do. Number 5, I would suggest that comms departments create pre-approved communication statements and templates that can be adapted quickly to the situation. For example, holding statements covering key messages like acknowledging that something has happened, saying we're taking steps to contain the incident, assuring people that they will be informed promptly when more details become available. Number 6, for comms people, and actually, can I ask, right, is everyone here going to work for a company, or some people are going to become journalists, or oh yeah, history. Okay, hands up, who's going to become a journalist? Who's going to work for a company? Who's going to work for government? So everyone. Okay, all the relationships you build with each other are actually very important. Because for company comms people, right, I would really hope that you have relationships with the media and also with government officials. With the media, because they are going to be wanting to know what happened, right? They want all the juicy things. Then you also need to be able to fend them off on them, like wanting to report on juicy things, on them approaching your employees. You need to give them enough so that they are satisfied. Also, remember, keep things confidential lah. And then for government officials, it's where the massive breaches involved, until to the point that the government is investigating. So one big example is the Singapore cyber attack, which I was involved in. So went all the way to involve MOH, MCI, which is now MTTI, and government officials, and CSE, sorry, also of course, SPF, AGC. I was dealing with all these government agencies. We need to know what to tell them when they ask questions. So the comms people are supposed to help us with this. And another example of why comms relationship with media is important is that, for example, during the Committee of Inquiry hearings, when my colleagues at IHIS were in court giving witness statements and giving evidence, a lot of reporters were there. And after all the hearings, right, at the end of the day or during lunch break, when my colleagues want to go home, the reporters were waiting outside, trying to take pictures of them. I don't know whether trying to take nice pictures or take unflattering pictures. Of course, unflattering pictures is bad lah. And my colleagues would try and run away from them until almost fall down also. So the next day, where's our comms people? I need some help, right? Of course, people weren't present in court, so I had to my own self approach the journalists, ask them, can you please don't chase after our colleagues because they almost fall down. I mean, this kind of thing is not usually what lawyers do. It is comms people that need to help out a bit lah. That's why I need comms people present, and they need to help out when there's investigations, things like that involving journalists. So, very important. And do media training for senior leadership and spokespersons, also very important. Last thing, consider secure encrypted channels for communications. Do after action reviews, and regularly review and update your plans, your crisis communications plans, incident response plans.
Thank you so much for sharing such valuable insights and really just reiterating what communication professionals have to do in such situations, as well as the importance of their job as well. So with that said, let's all move on to the Q&A portion. For all of you in the audience, please scan the QR code on the screen to submit your questions and we'll get through them promptly. So perhaps the both of you can each choose one question to answer, and if we get through them quickly, we can try and tackle as many as possible.
Okay, I chose the bottom question because that was something I wanted to mention also. What should a company prioritize in a data breach? Communicating the breach as quickly as possible or only when they have a better picture? It was something I was going to cover, but then we kind of ran out of time and had to move to Q&A. So for this, right, different departments will have different priorities and they're competing as part of comms. I mean, you're going to have your own priority, but in the end, all of us need to work together to try and balance it all together. So under the laws usually require you to notify of breaches within a certain timeline, and many of these laws, under many of these laws, the clock starts ticking only when it's confirmed to be a data breach. But some of these laws also say that if you're not really sure and a certain amount of time has passed, you can and should make a preliminary notification to the regulator first. You don't have to have all the information, you can be still unsure, but it's kind of just to give them a heads up first, and then later on when you're sure, when you have more details, you can update them on what's happening. And so I think this answers your question. But then I also want to talk about why how it matters that there are competing interests involved. Usually the legal team, or especially the business side, will not want to make these preliminary, I hate this word, preliminary notifications, because they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want they're afraid that the regulators will start investigating them, asking more questions, and disrupt whatever activities they are doing. And for me, as part of compliance, I need to make sure we are in compliance with the law, and also that we maintain a relationship with the regulators that is trusted, that they can trust us to tell the truth, to be transparent with them, and not to try and hide things. So that's the tension that I face in my work a lot. On one hand, business doesn't want to see anything and wants to just keep quiet. On the other hand, I need to make sure that we are transparent as possible with both our consumers and with the regulators, because once they don't trust you, things moving forward can get quite difficult. If they don't trust you, they'll ask even more questions. And if it involves a multi-jurisdictional breach, or even if it doesn't, right, regulators usually talk between themselves, like chit-chat. They also have WhatsApp. They can WhatsApp each other about what's happening in their own country. They meet for conferences and they chat about this breach took place, this person didn't tell me, this company just kept quiet. So you don't want yourself to get a bad reputation from hiding things. You don't want regulators around the world to start suspecting you of hiding things. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Darren.
Thank you. I think there was this question, which I'll read out here, which I think was pretty interesting. Darren, I think maybe we might want to both weigh in together. What are the data collection restrictions imposed on widely used apps like IG or TikTok? Users don't have much choice but to agree to T&Cs due to pervasive use. I'm going to take a first step at this because when I was giving a guest lecture in one of the classes in SMU, somebody asked me this question in a similar style, but the example that was given was that of WhatsApp. I think many people will remember, I think in 2021 or 2022, there was a sudden change of the terms of service, thank you. And on WhatsApp, right, then you had to accept. Then there wasn't a case for you to reject, you just had to accept in order to continue using WhatsApp. So the question that was posed, and I think this question goes in the same trajectory, what can consumers do? What is there to protect consumers? Well, I think first and foremost, we must remember that coming up with terms and conditions and changing these terms and conditions in and of itself is within the company's prerogative. They have the right to change the terms and conditions because there's nothing in the law that stops them and they can do it to fit their business needs. However, under Singapore's PDPA, for example, everything comes down to this question of the touch point of reasonableness. Is it reasonable for the organization to be doing that? So for example, when they change their privacy policies, let's say they're changing in terms of they want to allow data collection and for them to hold data in perpetuity. Is that reasonable? So that's something that as individuals, we may be able to take them to task to PDPC, for example, and to say, hey, I think this may be a potential complaint. So the law, the PDPA, the existing data protection regime allows for that balance of rights, shall we say, between organizations as well as individuals. The other safeguards in the PDPA also apply. Things like consent, things like purpose limitation, things like security, things like cross-border data transfers and so on. Yes, I know it's a tough situation because the end of the question said when these apps are ubiquitous. What the question is actually getting at is there is the network effect of these services. Because the network effect is so strong, if we don't agree with it, we don't use it simply because we don't agree with the privacy policy, we are effectively shutting ourselves out, right? But that being said, I think there are safeguards within the PDPA to deal with that. And I think it is also on us to be able to raise this perhaps to the Personal Data Protection Commission to see, hey, is this practice reasonable or not? And then I think the conversation can go from there. So it's not that consumers have no recourse, it's just what I'm telling you is that there is recourse, but that needs to be fed up to the PDPC. And so I think that's the situation.
Okay, just two short points. Number one, if you think it's unreasonable or unclear or anything, you can write to the DPO, and if the response is unsatisfactory, you can write to the PDPC and make a complaint. Number two, and you won't like this answer, then don't use law. You have a choice, right? Whether to use or not. If you don't like it, then don't use.
Which is why my team now works on Signal rather than WhatsApp, which is quite sad, but anyway.
Okay, so thank you to the both of you. Unfortunately, that is the end of our time, and that brings us to the end of this Q&A segment. Thank you all for the engaging questions, and a big thank you to Josh and Darren for the insightful responses.
Thank you. Hey, just to let you all know, Chatham House rule. So I don't know. Okay, is Chatham House rule? Does Chatham House rule apply? No, not sure.
Not really, but
Okay, this one needs to comms better next time. No, I'm just kidding. So for today, in order, because we've tried to share as candidly as possible, so attributions, please feel free, right? But I think don't attribute any of what we said to the organizations that we work in, are currently affiliated to or were affiliated to lah. Okay? Yeah. So thank you very much for your time and attention. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I forgot to say that I'm in my personal capacity today. So just a note.
You see, this is where all the lawyers come out. You see all the disclosure, all the caveats are coming out already. Yeah, thank you, thank you.
So if your question wasn't answered, or if you'd like to continue the conversation, do feel free to approach our speakers during the networking session happening right after this. So with that, thank you to everyone once again, and back to you, Saman.
What an insightful discussion. Thank you, Darren, Josh, and Aloysius. Our last panel of the day explores the fine line in navigating user-generated content, also known as UGC, in PR, how brands can harness consumer voices without over-commercialization. In an era where everyone can be a creator, critique, or crisis starter, how can PR professionals navigate this landscape effectively? Industry experts will share strategies to build trust, leverage authenticity, and mitigate backlash when UGC takes an unexpected turn. Our first panelist is Nicholas Chan. Nicholas is the Chief Strategist and Head of Digital for APMEA at the Hoffman Agency, where he leads strategy, AI, and integrated marketing communications across Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. With over 15 years of experience in PR and digital marketing, Nicholas specializes in applying consumer marketing techniques to transform B2B businesses. His work spans industries like FMCG, healthcare, corporate, travel, and beauty, with a client portfolio including Unilever, Tencent, Visa, and Qatar Airways. Our second panelist is James Chen, who is the Head of Communications at Klook, Asia's leading travel and experiences platform. Since joining Klook in 2019, James has built the communications function from the ground up, overseeing corporate, consumer, partner, and internal communications across Asia Pacific and globally. With over 15 years of experience, he specializes in crafting data-driven strategies that shape narratives and deliver impactful campaigns. Prior to Klook, James held leadership roles at ThyssenKrupp and Edelman, managing corporate communications, crisis frameworks, and campaigns for global brands like Samsung, AMD, and Motorola. His expertise spans media relations, executive communications, B2B storytelling, and social media outreach. Last but not least, we have Ms. Sabrina Azmi, who is currently the Research Solutions Director at Karma Asia. Sabrina specializes in communication research and analysis, advising clients on measuring campaign successes, monitoring alerts and analysis, and pre-communication strategies. She works on evaluating which platforms work best for various clients and measures the success of campaigns. Karma works with clients such as TikTok, Samsung, Emirates, BMW, Pepsi, Montblanc, Nestle, and Red Bull. Handing over to you, Arthur.
Testing. Okay, thanks, Saman. Before we start, we see a lot of these introductions are mostly stolen through LinkedIn. But I think I want to give some time for the panelists to introduce themselves and humanize the whole conversation first. Maybe you start off with James first.
Yeah, I just realized there was a whole lot of text. Basically, I head up comms at Klook. What it means really is telling the brand story. Sometimes giving a spotlight on the face behind the brand, so the founders. And sometimes when shit hits the fan, like the way lawyers said just now, like you get involved. You get involved from a crisis perspective. You ensure that the company's reputation is clear, is protected throughout those times. Yeah.
Rather than about me, maybe it's about my who I work for. So you all can hear me, right?
Hello. So I work for the Hoffman Agency. We're an agency. I think most of you know what an agency is. So when shit hits the fan, they will look for us, usually. not just them, right, companies. We claim that we solve business problems for clients. I think that's something that's important for us all to know. We study comms, but comms is a function of business. So we really have to be solving business problems. Now we represent as an agency some of the largest tech companies worldwide. We also are, I think, in the last 5 to 6 years, we've been winning Tech Agency of the Year like four times, I think. So that's a pretty good streak. So yeah, that's what we do. So we basically are specialist tech agencies servicing tech brands in integrated comms.
Hi, I'm Sabrina. So I work at Karma. We primarily do communication research and analysis. So I quite like this combination of the panel because a lot of the times we do work in like a tripartite sort of system where we work directly with the agency as well as the client to address specific needs, right? So we specialize in research. We provide the data and analysis for agencies so that they can strategize then for the client. So you can imagine that this sort of relationship is something that's very common that I work with. I'm also a very proud MMC student that hopefully graduates at the end of this month. Wish me luck. It's also not exam period, but assignment due date period for me. But yeah, I'm happy to be here and also happy to see a lot of my classmates sitting in the seats. Hi guys.
Thanks. Right, so I'll set the context of the discussion today. Today we're talking about UGC, and the context is, the digital transformation has revolutionized the way stories are being told. In today's age, anyone can be a content creator. You just simply need a phone, social media, post something, and there you go, that's your own UGC. So I think what this means for PR practitioners is that, they need to start engaging these UGC voices. You no longer work in your own silos where brands hold all that power. You need to listen to what the narrative is outside and stuff like that. So yeah, coming to our first question, what is considered UGC to you? Maybe we start off with Sabrina.
Thank you. I mean, essentially, UGC is content that's created by the normal users like you and I. So it's not paid influencer content. It's not something that you sponsor or your marketing team delivers. And a lot of the times, the UGC content, they bring a lot of authenticity, authentic voices to represent the brand. So it can be a very powerful tool when used properly. So stuff that I push out on my Instagram, that's a trend that I'm banking on with another brand, that's probably a UGC.
Yeah, I think it's very similar. I think that UGC sometimes, from a PR perspective, we see it as the most powerful form of PR, right? Because everything else is advertising, right? So usually there's no financial incentive attached to it. That's the easiest way to tell if something is UGC versus not. Although I have to say that, when it comes to influencers these days, it's a big gray area, right? So they don't collect money for everything they create. At the same time, there's some incentive behind it that maybe is not as transparent, right? But that, whether it's UGC or not, that's hard to say. Yeah. But generally, there's if you see financial incentives tagged to it, yeah, then I wouldn't consider UGC. That's how I define it.
Yeah, pretty bullet lines these days, right? But I think fundamentally it's word of mouth, but amplified like 1,000 times easily. It's raw, sometimes unfiltered, most times chaotic. And that's why it's so interesting for us from a PR point of view, like how do we harness it? Do we harness it? Do we control it? Right? I think those are fair questions. I think the panel today tries to answer that. And I think UGC or PGC, which is professional related content, is what brands are struggling with, and basically how does one really get on top of this to build reputation, or maybe even to kind of defend against some of these attacks.
Yeah, exactly. So the whole topic of today is, the lines are really blurred, and people can't really tell, whether this is UGC or not. But I think adding on, I want to talk a bit more about, why is UGC especially influential today? I mean, compared to previous times, maybe when you guys started in the industry, things might be done a bit differently back then compared to now. What are your thoughts on this?
The question is, how is UGC different now? I think the main difference to me is that the people sitting here, I assume most of you are students. You guys are probably the batch of the most powerful UGC creators compared to probably my generation. The amount, the quality, the quantity, both quality and quantity, right? The TikTok generation, you can't compare to UGC of the past. I think along with that, also comes difficulty. I think that my generation, when we learned to create UGC, I think it was baby steps. A lot of the skills are acquired, right? When you acquire skills, it comes with usually instruction manual. You learn it from somewhere. But to your generation, it is intuition, it is reflex, right? It's almost as if you were born with the ability to create UGC. So I think with that comes, I think maybe more authenticity, but also it's much more raw, like you mentioned. So I think that's the major difference. I think it's the quality and the quantity is vastly different.
Yeah, and if I can comment on that, you also see in a lot of recent research reports, so like Reuters Journalism Institute, Edelman's Trust Barometer, the key narrative here is that trust is dwindling in a lot of mainstream media. And naturally, people in, I would say, my generation, like millennials, Gen Zs, we tend to distrust mainstream media, advertising. So a lot of the times we will look to our peers, our own sort of like echo chambers, to gain information that we want to believe. And that's where UGC will come in really handy, because then it creates content that you trust. So for a lot of brands, it's important for us to tap into social media and UGC in order to get our messages across and have our audience actually trust the messaging that we're putting out.
Maybe just last point. I think it's the rebalancing of power in a way. I think everyone's voice is very different. If you are in this field, then it'll be very interesting to understand how exactly can a brand control its narrative beyond media. Because in the past, 10, 20 years ago, your media source was always your Straits Times, CNA, whatnot. But now you can go direct, right, to consumer, and you can cut through the clutter of, let's say, even traditional media. So since you're in the field, like, how do you exactly do that? So it's the rebalancing of power from individual down to brands that don't really need to depend on this anymore.
Right. So James made a really good point, and I'm gonna throw this question back at the panel. How do you create UGC campaigns that inspires your users to create content that helps the brand, rather than it being viral? But with content can be viral, but it can go both ways, good and bad for the brand. So if you're a brand, how do you create the right conditions for UGC to be generated that benefits the brand? Maybe Nick first.
So I used to work for Vans, right? Shoes, skate shoes. So I think UGC is, when I was working for the brand, this was a while back, UGC was very organic to how they ran the brand. So when you work for a brand, they have certain pillars that they want to hit, right? These are not necessarily just about selling shoes, right? It's about certain topics. So for Vans, it's very obvious what they are into. They're into music, they're into art, they're into extreme sports, right? BMX, skateboarding, and stuff like that. So I think them choosing art, music, and to a certain extent, with extreme sports where you have stunts and stuff like that, that was already they were very specific about choosing this to promote their shoes, exactly because these three genres, right, as halo topics are very UGC driven, right? So you think about making stunt videos, right, just small skate, like ollies and stuff like that, creation. So they go out of their way every year to create events to sort of harvest this UGC based on these very specific pillars, right? So if your brand really is into wanting UGC from users, right, I think it has to be part of what your brand does over and over and over and over again, rather than, hey, there's this campaign, it's Chinese New Year, let's dangle a carrot and see if people will create some content, right? Yes, that works to a certain extent, but people forget quickly. So I think that there are some brands that are very good at harnessing UGC, and that is part of their plan when they do planning, not just for 1 year, but maybe 10 years at a time. They will look at it in that kind of horizon, right? Then there are other brands that are just okay lah, we'll just hire some influencers. So usually I think that the way that Vans, as an example, does it is much better, much more sustainable, and actually they get a lot more authentic UGC compared to those that I mentioned, right? Oh, let's just hire some influencers, right? Show our products for Chinese New Year.
Yeah. Okay. So I think a lot of the work that we've been doing with brands recently is audience research, and especially when it comes to maybe implementing a UGC campaign, you have to understand your audiences a lot better, especially which platforms they are on and what kind of messaging resonates with them. You would want to sort of nudge their behavior in a certain way for them to create the content that you want them to create, right? So because of the volatile nature of UGC, you might not know how people will respond to whatever that you want them to put out. It is important to make sure that you give sort of clear direction of what kind of content you want. I mean, one of the examples that that I recall is, if you remember the McDonald's Grimace shake, where they had released like a Grimace, that purple monster, and then they had a purple shake, right? So, I mean, the idea was to promote the shake, which is what they achieved, but then the content that was coming out was really disturbing after a while. A lot of people were posting things that were very eerie, like, trigger warning a little bit, like people lying dead while holding the Grimace shake. So, in a sense, it's because they were targeting a specific audience, probably Gen Zs, on TikTok, that just took it to a whole other level, right? So I think being able to understand your audiences, which platforms they're on, what kind of messaging resonates with them, so that you can nudge them to a specific direction, would be very helpful. And in most cases, hopefully it works out lah. And then, we'll probably touch on this a bit later, but how you manage that afterwards then is important as well.
Yeah, I think virality in UGC is always a North Star, but very hard to achieve, really. I think you can't force it, so the more you force it, it's going to happen. I think like what they said, there needs to be some form of incentivization, whether that's a dopamine rush, whether that's financial, whether there's access to something. And then the last point I think is really be on culture. I think when you latch on culture, if you're authentic, then it writes. If it doesn't, then you just fall flat. And maybe just to add on to that is you have to experiment, like just go for it. Like a lot of social teams push out a lot of content, and maybe 1 out of 10 gets past some form of engagement metric, right? And that's a clear winner. So learn from them and see how it goes again. But the recipe keeps changing anyways.
Great response. So I was thinking, you want to incentivize UGC as a brand. So we're talking about, proactive methods. How do you encourage people to produce positive content? But I think the back end of that, the other side of that is, you risk being inauthentic. People call you out. They say, oh, you are forcing content in a single direction. You limit the type of content they produce. So people call you and say, you're trying to over-commercialize on UGC. So how do you find that balance, maintaining authenticity while still encouraging that kind of positive UGC that benefits a brand?
I guess if it's clearly a sales thing, like buy this vacuum cleaner, you're gonna know it's an ad, right? So the thing working with creators or basically any individuals who produce content is really do not cram their style. They've obviously been successful developing content the way they have, right? So as a brand, if you want to partner with them or work with them, it's about giving them the guidance, telling them here's what's in it for them, whether that's access to, let's say, a theme park, whether that's a percentage promo code they get, but you do not guide them among creators, right? So then authenticity is almost still in line with who they are as a creator. and then more importantly, you don't hard sell, right? I think because I work in travel, it's easier to maybe because of some industries to promote certain things in travel. It's very aspirational. I think that's why it works so well in the travel segment. But yeah, I think that's how you avoid over commercialization of it.
Maybe I can just add quickly. I think it's about consistency, how the brand communicates its products and services. In most cases, UGCs may not work for your organization, and you shouldn't force it if it isn't, right? And if you've gone a certain direction, it will be difficult for you to then suddenly move to a UGC campaign. If you take, for instance, Prism Plus, right? They work with a lot of sponsored ads. They work with a lot of influencers, sports people to promote their air conditioners and TVs. They've gone in a very specific direction to do that. And if Prism were to suddenly do a UGC, a lot of us will then start questioning, is this actually a sponsored ad or not? Because all that we've been seeing are sponsored ads. So as communicators, and what I typically speak about with my clients is what is the direction that you've gone in, and if you were to do research and you were to switch the way that you brand or communicate your products and services, will that then impact or make an impact on your actual organization? So that's something to think about as well.
So just now I mentioned bands, and I think that they already mentioned that consistency is quite key. I think the biggest fail is when a brand tries specifically to be authentic. Like, people can tell that actually you are not being authentic. If you are trying to sell something, actually it's okay. People know that you are trying to sell something, and it's okay to sell something, right? But if you are trying to go to a place where does not fit you and you were never consistent about, just to get that sale and try to hide it, right? I think people can smell it. So for example, fans, they play around the topic of music, right? They're very consistent about that. But they're very specific about the kind of music that they sort of promote, right? It's all kind of like underground bands you've never heard of, right? It's not even new bands, right? Like when we did concerts for them, it was really like bands that maybe have been around for a long time, but only a small percentage of the population know about, right? They are not suddenly going to sponsor Taylor Swift just because Taylor Swift is the hot shit. Exactly because the people that buy fans do not subscribe to the Taylor Swift audience, right? So that's them being very consistent and knowing their brand very well, right? They would rather sort of go with a band that not many people know about, but the people that know, really, they are like, okay, that's my kind of jam, right? So I think the consistency, I think people can tell over a long time, right? Then, at those events, even though it sounds so, bands, the kind of bands that they support sound very anti-consumer, right? The people there don't have a problem if Vans is selling shoes exactly outside the concert that they sponsored, right? So I think that it comes with the territory. Don't try to do things just to like pander to the audience.
Right. Now I want to steer the conversation a bit. So we've been talking about proactive UGC. I want to talk a bit more about the type of UGC that is more organic, that is not being influenced by campaigns from brands. So people in the audience, you might recall there was a saga with Charles and Keith where an amateur creator, she remarked that the bag was a luxury bag. And then people online were having the debate, whether Charles and Keith was a luxury bag or not. But in the end, the creators or the founders of Charles and Keith, they stepped up and then they said they came to defend the creator. I think they met for lunch, and after that, the whole online sentiment about Charles and Keith as a brand went into the positive. So I think that's one thing they did really well. So back to the panel, how should brands respond when UGC suddenly becomes viral, be it from your own campaigns or just very organically driven UGC? How should we respond to that?
So I think the Charles and Keith one blew up, and I don't think that was definitely, in my opinion, I don't think that there are campaigns like that sometimes were plotted and created, but I don't think that was. I think that in itself was quite authentic. I think the brand took it and ran with it. I think that's good. In fact, I probably don't think that their agency did it, right? Probably somebody at HQ saw it. That's how they were able to respond so fast. I think that whether it's good or bad, most brands choose not to respond to bad UGC. That means UGC that's like complaining, flaming them. There are also brands who's created names for themselves exactly only responding to haters, and then garnering a lot of fans in the process, right? So if you must have seen screenshots circulating very often of Wendy's flaming their audiences, or like just like sick burn sort of comments, right? So that has then become their kind of a brand. So I think that there's no right way to do it. There's a risk appetite for every brand. Certainly some brands have zero risk appetite. Some brands can afford to have no limit to risk appetite, right? So it depends on really the kind of brand that you want to build. But again, the consistency is, I think, what matters here, right? Because when Wendy does all these sort of insult retorts, they are very consistent about that. And there's actually a very good team with a very good brand Bible behind it about, okay, where can we play and what can we say and what can we not? What is pushing the boundary and where exactly the red line is, right? So all this is actually orchestrated, and actually if you can do it, you can do it really well. So I don't think that there's a right formula. Sometimes this kind of thing is lightning in a bottle. It's not just about the brand, it's about who is working, who is on the team working on the brand. It's not easy to come up with all the insults that the Wendy's team comes up with. So yeah. So if you have it, you should capitalize on it, right?
I really think it depends on how people are reacting to a particular UGC. So a lot of the work that we do is to monitor and assess all of these potential risks to our clients. But before that even, it's good to map out what are some of the issues that matter to the organization. So we do carry out exercises where we say, okay, what kind of content would be something that's risky? What kind of content do we then respond to? And what kind of content can we actively engage in? Right. So this is really, again, as you mentioned, as Nicholas mentioned, it's up to the organization's appetite. Right. How much is it do your leaders want to respond to? What is the brand direction and the brand messaging that you want to consistently push out? I think for Charles & Keith, they've always kind of positioned themselves as somewhat of an affordable luxury brand. So this kind of UGC works very well with their branding. So it made sense for them to respond, right? But in any case, if somebody were just to post something and saying that their shoes are uncomfortable or whatever, then that might not be something that they want to respond to on that specific platform. I think for most brands, not responding can sometimes be damaging, but you have to be a bit careful when it comes to social media, when there's a lot of noise that's going on. So it has to be very prescriptive. What kind of issues and risks are you willing to address, and monitoring it with your data monitoring provider or your research team in order to understand when is the threshold that's reached so that I can respond to it.
Yeah, I think about it a little bit differently. I think social is increasingly now just or more of a customer service tool. Like China's a great example. Like a lot of the brands in China live and die by social, right? And if you don't get good views, or if customer complains and it's out on social, huge impact on demand and revenue. So I think social media channels, increasingly customer service recovery. Two, generally, my take is for brands to respond on social should take a lot. So what I mean by that is I always think it's better to hold off, because the goal for us as communicators is to diminish or lower the risk of negative fallout, right? And I think every time you respond, and what you should think is, am I increasing the risk to fuel a conversation? Because some of these customer issues should be managed and resolved offline, right? That's what the customer service team would do. But if you bring this to the public sphere, then that increases the greater risk of another wave of coverage, right? And I think that's something that I find very useful to think about, because what's our role and basically what do we want to achieve from this. Now the trust and key one is a great positive example, not negative, because I was talking about negative earlier. I think it's a great template almost to do this, because people feel good about these stories, and I think people like to know that brands can do good. And I think if you're working in a brand, you see these opportunities, I think it's a great template, a great way to kind of garner some positive social momentum.
Yeah, I think that campaign in particular, right, really put like Charles and Keith, it's like them and that girl against bullies. I think I mean, every good feel-good story, you know, is always about like triumph over evil, right? So I think that's why it resonated.
Right. Yeah, I'm starting to see a few Q&A questions. And there's one that really caught my attention. This one goes, is there a point where UGC becomes so influential that it reshapes the brand more than the brand shapes itself? And I'm guessing the context of this question, be it positive or negative. If it's positive, maybe it's something that users are trying to tell you, consumers are trying to tell you as a brand. Is that something you should be listening to as a brand?
I think so. I think that there's a lot of good examples of brands doing this. At the end of the day, what is UGC? UGC partially is feedback to the brand. I know maybe a day or two ago, I think Milo released like Milo truck flavor Milo. I didn't taste it, but I assume it's, I think many of us, or it's been rumored that Milo truck Milo tastes different than normal Milo, or that Australia Milo and Singapore and Milo and Malaysia Milo taste different, right? But at the end of the day, the point is that I think that they did, there was an insight probably internally that people do care that they can't taste Milo truck flavor Milo all the time, so then they packaged it. So I think that in that sense, that's almost a small example of what you talk about, right? Where I think maybe the UGC, the legend of the Milo truck Milo has traveled so far that they decided to change their brand to do something about it, right? And if you think that it's just a packaging, like those of you, one day if you go and work at a FMCG brand, it's not easy for them to retool the factory to change the packaging or the formulation. It's actually a huge task that costs a lot of money, right? So for them to do it in the first place is not an easy feat, right? So I think that the opportunities are there.
Right. So yeah, I think we'll now move into the Q&A section. There are quite a number of questions. I'm just trying to look. I think there are a few questions that are directed towards Klook. There's one question from Klook. Yeah, for Klook, which UGC campaign was the most successful and why?
This is more personal. Early last year, went to Tokyo with my wife and was doing a go-kart ride in Akihabara. And I saw this other American couple, and this was just when the Klook Creator program just took off. And I was curious, so I asked them like, hey, like how do you book this ride? Because this, like, we were the only two people or two couples in the group, right? And she said TikTok. I said, oh, really? Like what was it? And she was sharing that, she saw this influencer talk about booking Airport Express from Klook, and basically that sparked off her entire journey, booking everything else on Klook, which is obviously very fantastic for us as a brand. So there are many campaigns that we run, right? But I think the ones that are most powerful is the ones that you see it, believe it, and kind of experience it yourself. So it could be your previous trip, it could be your next trip, and everyone else is going to be very different, right? Like I know right now a lot of social content is geared towards upcoming destinations, China being one of them. So in fact, I'm going this Friday. But I know many Singaporeans are now heading towards China. But interestingly, Filipinos are going to China. Thailand people are going to China. And then more and more as well, right? So I think these campaigns, sometimes they are for marketing, sometimes they are very organic. And I think these are the ones that really strike a note.
I just want to add that I think Klook has quite an amazing I don't know if it's part of your strategy, but you can't really tell which one is paid and which one is organic, which I think is really great because then all of your content is trusted, right? And I think that works really well for experiential types of brands, because then whatever that you're looking for and then the content comes up, you will trust it. So where UGC becomes really powerful is when the content that you push out is very authentic in nature, that all of it is trusted, and then your brand itself has a very strong reputation as a result.
I have to disagree with what you said. I'm sorry, but if all the brand, if everything that comes from the brand, including UGC, I can't tell, I'm gonna, as a consumer, not trust any of it. Right? Examples of certain, not even a big organization, right? Sometimes you get like, oh, I'll give you a drink if you give me a 5-star review. So you get like 200 5-star reviews on a bak chor mee stall. I think there's a problem here. And I think that your generation is going to be even better at sort of responding or really seeing through these kind of tactics than, let's say, my mom, right? So I would have to say that at some point, there's going to be a bounce back where people will be like, yeah, that's bullshit.
This is a clear example of how different your audiences can be, and then tailoring it accordingly.
Right, yeah. It's great we are getting different perspectives. So I want to build on Nicholas' point that there's a question which asks, how do you view brands that hire fake UGC creators to artificially boost certain topics to go viral? So I guess this would be the more gray area kind of UGC. So what are your thoughts on this type of UGC?
I support it. You see, on one hand, right, you have to remember as a practitioner, there's no right or wrong. So if you ask me, have I proposed this to clients? Yeah, of course, right? At the end of the day, they even give out awards for guerrilla marketing, right? What is that if not guerrilla marketing? So I think that from an ethical standpoint, right, because we're in the school, right, you should disclose. And I'll give a very good example. I think this was many years ago when circles first came out. They got the UTL 666 girls that I like very much. I don't know where they go, right? But they got them to, I think, deface some wall or something. Which then after that they came out to say that, hey, actually this was a campaign by us. They were not shady about it. But of course, for it to even take off in the first place, they may have bought some paid and all that. But it looked like a lot of people were fooled into thinking it was real. But then they did come out and say, no, this was a sponsored and that's the reason behind it, right? So I think that maybe to a certain extent, from an ethical standpoint, I think that that's a good template for doing that, right? To totally not disclose, yeah, we do it, sure. Clients ask for it, sure. But yeah, whether it's right, I think even if we continue doing it, like I said, users are getting very smart about it. So maybe a few years from now, you'll have a course where they will tell you that actually, based on research, that is at this time going to be counterproductive. Right? So trends change, people get more savvy. So I don't think that there's a right or wrong way to do it. I can say for sure that once you go into the workforce, right, there's a lot of these things that it's very gray area. It's no right or wrong, right? So I'm a hypocrite by saying that, yeah, I know I don't really support it, but yeah, of course I've done it.
Okay, just to caveat, what does fake UGC actually mean? If one of you can just qualify that, what does fake UGC mean? Do you believe that's not happening? Okay, cool. Okay. Just to set the floor. I think it was entirely false. Like another one really good example is like Google reviews on map, right? And you can tell when they are entirely false. But in most situations, like in influencer partnerships, maybe 5 years ago, you pay them, let's say, X amount of dollars to post something, right? So you get all these very big creators promoting a brand, right? And that's a paid relationship, and they have to disclose it, right? Today is a little bit blurry, but they still have to disclose it. But in I think the current way of influence is nano and micro content creators. So basically everyone here, you can potentially promote something, right? But what's in it for you doesn't have to be a paid, like a fully, like a agreed partnership with a brand. It could be like an affiliate one, right? Like you get a kickback from a brand, like on Shopee, when you sell something, right? So there are many models of what it is now. I think it's harder to discern whether someone has an agenda, but then again, actually, in the past, it never did. It was also difficult, right? It's just that your media right now is so immediate, so instant. It's on social, yeah. So I think you see, I hard to qualify what it is because it's prevalent, right?
Right. Yeah. So I mean, so we are at the place where we started. You know, it's always a thin line. You can't really tell. It's a very gray area topic. I want to talk about this question. There's one that just came in. How do you evaluate a UGC campaign's result, quantitatively or focusing more on reputation? And yeah, maybe you can hear from the leaders here. How do you evaluate a UGC campaign?
Call karma.
Thank you. So I want to bring back what Nicholas said at the very start, which is that the role of comms is strategic. We're here to solve business problems, right? So the way to evaluate not just use UGC campaigns, but any sort of communication campaigns is to then look at your business impact. How does whatever engagement or how many number of positive comments, how does that then translate or contribute to your organization's reputation? How does that then convert into actual awareness and perception improvements within the organization? So a lot of you are very familiar with the usual social media metrics, your likes, your shares, your positive comments. These are things that are very easy to measure. But where you can really contribute and place your communication teams in a more strategic manner is to then start to link all of these different media metrics then to actual business impact, right? There's no straight answer. I think a lot of times my job is actually to guide my clients into finding out what is that business metric that is relevant to communication. But oftentimes it's things like awareness, perception, consideration, reputation, your reputational score, your trust score within your target audience. So these are things that are important to measure. So to sum up, I mean, the media metrics are obvious, right? That's how you know if it's a positive impact or a negative impact. But afterwards, then you need to really assess what is that long-term business impact that you're generating for your organization.
So I have an easy answer. Because I'm looking through campaign plans a lot because my juniors will do them, right? So I will look through them and help them troubleshoot. So the biggest thing that you need to always have is you have to have a call to action. It's very easy, it's black and white. Does your campaign have some sort of a call to action? With a call to action, you can measure, right? Whether it's to buy something, click a link, right? So if you have a campaign or you ask an influencer to post something, there's no call to action, you just burn the money better.
Yeah, I guess for e-com model is actually pretty straightforward. So if you look at conversions, you look at downloads, you look at different things like that. So I mean, beyond awareness, upper funnel stuff like lower funnel, social is actually very beautiful compared to like normal, traditional earned media. I think with social, you open, as practitioners, you open yourself up to more attributable, measurable success metrics, and then it's easier to justify your existence as well.
Right, great. Before we end off, yeah, I have a personal question. It's not here. It's not related to the topic at all, but more of asking for the audience as well. Is there any advice you want to give to all our aspiring PR professionals here? A lot of them are year 4s, master students who are going to graduate soon. What's one advice you would give to them?
I guess don't be a lawyer, like he said. That's number one. No, I'm just, I think for comms, actually it evolves fast, but it doesn't, right? Why I say that is because as a digital practitioner, I've been saying that PR will die since like 10 years ago, but PR is still here, right? Because what's supposed to take over PR is digital, is my field. Then, now digital, social media, I also feel like it's dying. But actually, there are just forms of it that's just evolved. So I think the important thing as a practitioner is you need to try. Because trying is learning, right? If you want to pick good clients to work for, good brands to work for, good boss to work for, right? Test whether they have the appetite to let you try, right? Those that actually just want you to do things safe and just do it their way and don't have much avenue for you to try, I would think twice about that, right? Yeah.
I think in addition to that, like stay close to the lawyers. General experience, great thinkers, in-house, especially in-house. When shit is a fan, you're one of the close allies, legal profession. So data breaches, customer incidents, whatnot, tap on them. There's so much to learn, right? So my other point was really stay curious. Platforms change. Before TikTok, there was Facebook. Before Facebook, there was Friendster, MySpace, and all that jazz. So the beauty of comms is it actually doesn't evolve that much, but platforms do. So I think you really got to be curious, try everything. Even though if you're older, you can get on TikTok, but that's precisely it. So if you understand the medium, then you basically understand how to communicate.
Yeah. Maybe I'll just add on. I think the reason why I've been in this media intelligence, data analysis industry for so long is because it's so important. With everything that you do, whenever you speak to your managers, your bosses, even when we're presenting work for our lecturers, the one thing that we need to back it up with is data and analysis, right? There is no such thing as, oh, I feel like this might work anymore. Even PR practitioners who have been had many experience in the field, they still cannot only rely on their intuition. They need data and analysis to back it up. So it's something that you should carry with you when you're going to the workforce, and something that I found that is very strong to argue, to help support your argument in any sort of discussion.
Right, yeah. We heard a lot. I think we learned a lot about UGC today. And again, I want to thank all our panelists today, Sabrina, Nick, James. If you want to catch them, stay around. They'll be here for a bit. Ask them all your questions. If not, I'll pass the time back to Saman.
Thank you, panelists, for sharing your experience, insights, and the valuable lessons for all of us today. It was truly such an invaluable experience for us all. And as a reminder to all of us, if there was any sensitive information shared, please do keep it within the space out of respect for our panelists. And with that, on the behalf of the WKW School and the organizing committee, we would like to thank our audience for taking the time to come today to hear from our panelists on such relevant topics. And not to forget key people whom which this event would not have been possible without: our panelists, Ms. Wong for guiding us, and the WKW School for giving us the platform and resources to execute such a successful event. Before you leave, it would be really appreciated if all of you could fill out this feedback form to see how we can do better next time. Just a reminder to our panelists that we'll be having a photo-taking session with the organizing team outside the LFLT after. And with that, you may all proceed outside the LFLT near the benches for a buffet reception and a chance to network with our 6 distinguished panelists, consisting of Darren, James, Sabrina, Jiajun, Nicholas, and James. For the buffet, do take note that you need to clearly show your lanyard or name stickers to ensure that we know that you are the attendees who are consuming in this buffet. Thank you so much.